You're listening to Find the Good News, Episode 27, The Sugar Bowl, featuring Brook Hanemann. This episode of Find the Good News is sponsored by Parker Brand Creative Services, a branding agency that thinks sideways, pushes forward, and gets your brand up. Check out our work at parkerbrandup.com. Would you like to help make sure I'm asking my guests the really good questions? Just visit findthegood.news and click the Questions tab. I'll see if I can get your question dropped in the fishbowl. Each episode, my guests will dive deep, select 3 random questions, and if yours is selected, I'll ask it on the show. That's findthegood.news. Brook Hanemann, the director of banners at McNeese State University, agreed to visit with me on Find the Good News. Like other guests, I knew very little about her before our conversation. Also, like other guests, it was an absolute pleasure to get to know her. There's something thoughtful and poetic in the way Brook speaks. She often closed her eyes when she would recount stories of her youth, and her descriptions of her childhood haunts were sweet, dripping with heavenly honey. I could feel the light on my own skin in her words, as Brook took me back to the places and people that shaped her. Those forever experiences, enshrined in her mind, the catalysts for all her talents, passions, and dreams. Theater, art, dance, it's all there in her timeline. She shared joy and loss, life and love, death and birth. As her name implies, we meandered gently downstream from one lovely experience to the next, never regretting a single ripple or eddy as we babbled along around sharp rocks and soft sandy banks. Brook has a knack for sharing the experiences that shaped her, and this gift gives more merit to her insights. Her story of the Sugar Bowl, the name of this episode, is revealed in her retelling of a great blessing. You see, Brook was baptized on the Isle of Ireland, the land of shepherds and saints, at the hands of one of the most insightful and good-hearted men to have ever walked the earth. Her delivery of this spiritual experience is not something I'll soon forget, and imprinted upon me the importance of being truly present and always humble as a child of creation. Brook looks deeply into her own timeline, the whole of her history, and she captures that energy, the full force of that magic, then puts it to work manifesting new and glorious things. I have to believe that some of that mystic, ethereal dust is sprinkled on the offerings of banners at McNeese State University. The good news is that if we look closely at this cultural program, we'll see a bit of Brook Hanemann's history flowing comfortably into it, fusing and melting directly into our own.
Wake up, it's morning. You're dreaming up a story. I can hear the way it's going, 'cause you're laughing in your sleep on the path to your deliverance, and a holy wall of light pouring through your window.
Old news, bad news, fake news. Sometimes you just want to shut it all down and get no news at all. With Find the Good News, I aim to change that by focusing on good people doing good work. I visit with artists, educators, civic and spiritual leaders, musicians, business owners, students, volunteers, and everyday citizens who are using their creativity, resources, and talents to bring hope and happiness to their corner of the world. In each episode, I dig into the hearts and minds of my extraordinary guests. We have street-level conversations about relatable things going on in their lives, discover the critical life experiences that shape them, the perspectives that drive them, and the fundamental beliefs that are anchoring them to a path of goodness. There's a lot of news in the world. My name is Oran Parker, and I'm going to find the good.
And I love you just as well.
Would like to get to know them better.
Right.
Honestly, it's probably where some of this show was born.
Yeah.
You know, just in that desire to get to know people better. But what's great is now all these people are just sending me all these names of people I haven't met.
I think that's got to be an incredible gift.
It's an experience, and it is a gift. It's exactly the word I use, a gift, a blessing, a grace, because I'm probably we were actually talking about that in our morning meeting. I'm probably somebody who and it comes from old social anxiety where I've maybe not known how to approach people properly. because I don't really do well with chit chat and small talk.
Sure.
I do better with like deep dive stuff, and so I always avoid going in because I'm going in for the kill. Like I'm going all the way, and so this show creates I guess a landing space for that.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm hoping other people are getting something out of it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're amassing an army of good people and making people aware of the army of good people that are out there.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think for me was another start of this was you can kind of get, I mean, maybe not everybody, but I know my own mind, that you can get caught in sort of the negative things that are flying around out there.
Yeah.
And so reminding yourself that there's not only good people, but good people who have like deep, long stories of goodness.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for. I'm always looking to find out the why.
Yeah.
Not just the thing that was done, but where did it come from? Where did it start? Yeah. And so I didn't know a lot about you, but I did my little light cyber stalking. So let's just start off with what you're doing today.
Sure.
And we'll just backtrack from there, okay?
Okay.
So I know what you do, but why don't you tell everybody what you do?
Absolutely. I'm the director of banners at McNeese State University. And that is an organization that is 26 years strong, and it brings arts and humanities programming to Lake Charles, and we endeavor to bring a diverse group of films, theater, music, lectures, documentaries. Every spring we have a season. We also have a fundraiser, Rouge et Blanc. Many people know us for that.
Yeah.
That's the wine and food tasting, but even when you're out there enjoying the wine and food, it's to support Banners, and Banners has a huge outreach, and we go into schools and we bring schools to us, and it's there's no place in Lake Charles that I would rather work than there. I literally, sometimes when I walk around that campus, I inadvertently find myself saying thank you with every footstep. Thank you.
Really?
Thank you. Yeah.
Wow. So it's been a blessing to you.
It's huge. And it's such an amazing time to be out there on that campus with Dr. Brook Hanemann. It's kind of a renaissance, I think. And I think Jody has talked about that too. But there are so many people that are amassing right now that are looking to create a rich community and in such diverse different areas, but it's a wonderful place to be. It's a wonderful staff. It's a wonderful organization. Jody is he's indefatigable. He's unstoppable. I'm so impressed with what he and Jessica, who's also incredibly talented, have been able to accomplish. They came in and pulled off Rouge et Blanc with no time, and I liken it to learning how to fly a jet while in air.
Wow, yeah.
We were hurtling towards it, and they just took on, and it was it's a stellar group of humans to work with. And I think that so much of our lives, our waking daily hours, are spent at work Monday through Friday.
Right.
And so for you to love what you do, your life is immensely blessed. And if you don't love what you do, then there's a good portion of your life that's just depleted. So I'm wildly lucky.
Yeah, you just kind of nailed it and really touched on something that is so important to me, is the time you do have here, what are you doing with it, and I think it's easy to get caught in a pattern of behavior, and I know working for a lot of people is just surviving to take care of somebody, and that's a reality that some people face.
It is.
But you said the other part of that is when you can do something you love, that the way that affects your life, what a blessing that really is. Because when you're in that space, I mean, I don't know, that you're lining up parts of yourself, I think, that we're always supposed to do something. It's like little tumblers fall in place, things start to unlock. Yeah. So how long have you been at Banners?
I had my 1 year anniversary last month.
1 year. Wow.
Year.
Okay. So let's start drawing the line back. Where do you come from?
Where do I come from?
Yeah.
I was born in New Orleans, lived North Shore most of my time. My mother and my father, we were very we were not a moneyed family, but wildly rich, because they raised me in nature and to have a reverence for nature and art and theater and literature and people and community. And every chance they could, they put me just in front of wildly creative people. And I got raised in, the green rooms of theaters and danced from when I was very, very small in this little converted church with stained glass windows.
Oh,
so
wow.
it was a beautiful, and although we didn't have a lot of money, I remember we grew up on 150 acres. It was long winding country roads with wild roses growing along pecan fields, and the gates were just laden with wisteria, and streams and ponds and oak trees with Spanish moss and stars like diamonds. It was and I was allowed to just go, I'm an only child, so I was allowed to just go run and try to find islands or run around with my dogs or just be free. They gave me freedom and they gave me reverence, and they were incredible humans. I won the lottery, and my parents,
Wow.
they're polar opposites in philosophy in many ways, but bound by love and reverence for things that are really important. I remember my father telling me, if you have a love for nature and if you have a love for theater, was the thing that we shared most, art, no matter how much money you do or don't have, you will always be rich.
Wow. You're right. You won the lottery.
I did.
I mean, there's so much to unpack right there with what you said. I mean, as I'm listening to you, and I wish people could see you talk about it, you're painting a picture, and I'm walking into by these fences,
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So when you go back there, is that a real place to you in your mind?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, I know it was a real place, and
Yeah.
it is a real place, but I mean, can you go there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you do that a lot? Is that like a place you go?
You mean mentally or
Yeah,
internally?
mentally, just...
Yes, I dream about it. It's, it was just magical on so many levels. There was an old water tower I was never allowed to climb, which of course I was on top of often. And there was one little magical space. There was a 2-room structure, a little house. I'm not really sure what it was on the property, but on the edge of it, there had been a barn, but the walls of the barn had fallen. And so the only thing that stood was the tin roof. So you could climb out the window of the structure, down a ladder into this little fort that I created, and I found like oriental rugs and antique wood tables, and I pulled it down there and had this magical little getaway, this place.
And you can go there in your mind anytime.
Absolutely.
I love that.
It's a solace for me, for sure.
And I mean, I know this is about you, but at the same time, there's so many things that I think of when I'm listening to you talk about that. And one of the things I talk about with my wife and my children a lot, and even friends, is the heart cave. And I have a place that I go, and it's like I can go there anywhere, anytime I really need to. And it changes over time, but it's real visceral. When I'm there, I can smell it and feel the temperature and hear the sounds outside. And it's a lovely place that's all my own,
Yeah.
And what's neat about it is rooms tend to get added on as I've lived, where I can open a door and go in there, and there's things in there that maybe are devoted to a person that was in my life, And so I'm listening to you talk about that, and I don't know, behind my eyes, I kind of feel tears, but like tears of joy.
You're
because
there,
it's
yeah.
that, you go, man, that is a blessing. It makes me think of one particular memory I have with my father. We had lived here in Sulphur on this Cardinal Drive. Now, back then, there weren't a lot of homes, but I was very little. And I asked my mom one time, because I had this memory, I said, I'm going to describe something to you, but I want to make sure I'm not imagining this. And she was like, wow, you were little, like 2 or 3 years old. But I had this memory of being really high up, and of my father holding his hands on my legs, and I can like really go there and feel that memory. And we would walk down the shell road and off into sort of like an opening, and there were honeysuckles everywhere. And I can remember him plucking one of those honeysuckles and pulling the little drop out and putting it up, his hand coming up and put it in my mouth. And like, it's so vivid,
Visceral.
and visceral, that like I had to believe it was real. And when I described it to her, because we used to do that all the time when you were little. And so now when I'm having a moment with one of my kids or anything, I call them honeysuckle moments, because it's like, okay, this being aware that something of value is happening. And I think sometimes, and again, I'm bringing it full circle to what y'all are doing over at Banners. who knows, in that audience of whatever it is you're presenting, whether it's a reading or a performance, that a person out there might be having a honeysuckle moment, right?
Yeah.
And what a gift that is to whoever's in that audience. And, you know, maybe 3 people, it might be 10, but that could be a life changer for them.
Right. And that's why I love art so much. And I don't think art is a luxury. I think that it's a necessity. And I think that it's that the fact that you have no idea who you are touching in what way. You as a human being, you carry so much internally into a room that no one could ever conceive of. You don't know how that art is going to land in the audience. And then conversely, when you're involved in creating the art, sometimes the most magnificent things out of that art is what happened that the audience doesn't get to see. It reminds me of a play. It's called Wit by Margaret Edson. And I directed it at a college that I had worked at. And the cast was huge, and I had a lot of kids in my class who were just freshmen. They were straight out of high school, fresh out of their parents', enclaves into, their own living. And the play is about a woman who finds out that she has stage 4 ovarian cancer, and it's written in this beautiful way. It was written actually by a kindergarten teacher who wrote the play, won a Pulitzer, never wrote another play.
Really?
But it starts off with this woman, and she direct addresses the audience. She comes in bald-headed with a cap on and a gown, and she's holding her IV, and she says, I'll never forget the day that I found out I had cancer. And the doctor wheels on. He doesn't even make eye contact with her. And he says, you have cancer. And
wow.
She said, see, unforgettable. And the whole thing, she goes through this process that so many of us have gone through with loved ones, But at the same time, she is a professor of the Holy Sonnets of John Donne, which is metaphysical poetry, which is a step above, more cerebral than Shakespeare. So she's very well advanced, and she's lost the human touch. And the play is really about the human touch. Well, when we started the play, I did what's called table work before we started reading through the script. And we talked about death and dying. And we talked about what at the end of your life matters. At the end of your life, is it the degrees that you got? Is it the position that you hold? Is it the money that you have? What are the things? And we went through the stages of death and dying, and the experience from that. I remember I had a child break down in tears, and she said, we don't speak about death in my family, and I'm terrified, and sometimes at night I cry myself to sleep about it, and I'm terrified about this. And there was another one, who came up when I said, what matters at the end? What would you regret? And one girl, she was a freshman, she was a child, and she said, I haven't spoken to my father in 2 years. And she teared up and she said, I'm not even really sure why. We just got in a fight, And we went through the process, and, there was one kid, I'll be honest about this, there was this one child that I had cast because he kind of embodied the character, and the character was kind of really pompous and cocky and not human touch and just would joke, and he had walls, and I was thinking, well, he's perfect. I don't even have to direct him. I just put him on stage, and he would never take anything seriously. Well, about 2 days into the table work, he asked if he could go to the restroom. I said, sure. He came back, and we were doing a talk, and he said, I just want to tell something to the cast. And I thought, oh no, here it comes, And he said, I walked out, I asked to go to the bathroom. He said, I didn't have to go to the bathroom. He said, my father killed himself 4 months ago, and yesterday my little brother, who's 7, his turtle died, and I wanted to call him and tell him that I love him. And in that moment, it was like, here is humanity where we don't usually see it, And at the end of the process, it was just, there was a talk back after the show, and someone said to the cast, did this affect you at all? And they were like, one girl said, I was afraid of death my whole life, and I'm not afraid anymore. The other girl raised her hand, and she said, I hadn't spoken to my father in 2 years, and now he's in the audience right now.
Yeah.
And, it's just, the audience may not even know what's happening behind the scenes when the painting is painted or when the music is written. But it creates a wake of humanity, and I think that the arts, in whatever form they come to you in, remind us that we are all carrying these internal worlds around within us. And although we walk around in the world and we try to put on a professional face in the midst of maybe huge personal tragedy in your life, when we try to act, air quotes, normal, we are all carrying desire, passion, rage, need, want, agony. We've all been on our knees and And we learn that and are reminded of that through jazz and blues and literature. And so, again, it's a blessing to be a part of facilitating that in any way.
Yeah, golly, man. Gee whiz. Everything you're saying, I'm just mesmerized and sucked into that, because I didn't expect you to go into death like that, but that's a conversation that I could probably stay in for a long time, because death's been the great revealer for me so many times.
That's really well said.
I have seen my own face. I've seen the true face of other people. It's changed me, and sometimes I think it hasn't necessarily changed me, or it's maybe just stripped things away and shown me who I am.
Right.
And I don't know, sometimes I think it's easy to just say, well, death is a beautiful thing, and sometimes when I say that, I feel like I need to sit there with the person I'm saying it to and unpack it, because there's so much more to that. You just said so much of what it really carries me through my life. I mean, the whole history of not only my family timeline, the things I know and I don't know, live in me.
Yeah.
And so everything that's happened to just me and my one little timeline, and when you keep branching out backwards, just this domino effect of everything that you do is an accumulation. I mean, whether just us sitting here at this table is the fulfillment of an entire history of people.
Yeah.
That is, so to some people, I think that might be too heavy to think about on a day-to-day basis. But if you can take all that gravity and bring it into the moment of an interaction, it sharpens that. Yeah.
Everything. I honestly, when I was driving over here, I thought to myself, well, there's some things that I will choose not to talk about. I'm about to talk about that because you said, death is the great revealer. I had an experience very recently where I went and saw my father on Father's Day, and on Monday I stayed because my mother is a beautiful reporter. She's an incredible writer. She's done things. She was one of the founders of the Bogalusa Blues and Heritage Festival. She created, civil rights museums and just did all these amazing things. And she came home from work one day and looked at her notes from a city council meeting and realized they didn't make sense. And so we were taking her to get these neurological tests. So on Monday I went with her. On Thursday, they told her she had aphasia, which is, I liken it to that black and white movie, Johnny Get Your Gun, where the prisoner is without arms and legs and he can't speak and he's trying to speak through. But his mind is clear, but nobody knows.
There's no way for him to communicate. Right?
That's what aphasia is. First, it takes away your your writing abilities, and then your linguistic abilities, and then your ability to understand reading, and then your ability to understand the language. Well, the day they told her that, my father fell, broke 5 ribs, collapsed a lung, and we ended up in SICU for 7 weeks. I was 9 months pregnant, and I had to make the decision to turn off my father's breathing machine. And at that time, over that 7-day period, my mother deteriorated. Somebody robbed my parents' house, stole her car, and then I had a baby 4 weeks later after my father died. And then my mother also came down with a fast case of dementia. And that all happened about 5 months ago. And so they were such an influence in my life and so beautiful in my life, and I became an orphan very quickly, not prepared for it in a way. But the whole experience, it's a little bit crass, but either when you look at bad things in your life, they can either be excrement or they can be fertilizer. And so you choose. You can't change what happens or befalls you, but you do choose how your mind is going to wrap itself around that, and whether you let pain and agony best you or whether you take it to kind of sharpen the joys that are in your life and appreciate what's in your life. And I think that I think that death as the great revealer, I mean, gosh, it is. All of a sudden, all of these things happen and you're walking around going through your day-to-day things and dealing with your business and making the deadlines and doing all this stuff. No one has any clue what's going on with you.
Right.
But all of a sudden you start looking at things and thinking, what is important to me?
Yeah.
your organization, your job is not going to be at graveside. But if your work is meaningful and you know that you're creating a wake of goodness behind you, then it does go with you. And it just makes you realize the things that are beautiful and the things that, I mean, it's just the thing, like driving down the road and seeing the sun come up and it's streaming through the trees and it's dappling the water. And when normally you would just speed by that, it gives you a second to look at and think, oh my gosh, it's beautiful. There's a philosopher, John O'Donohue.
Oh my gosh.
And
I know who John O'Donohue is.
oh my gosh, we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I read John O'Donohue's book, Blessings, every morning for my morning prayer.
Okay, oh my God, I'm so excited. I don't know anyone who knows who he is.
Well, I'm going to put a pin right here just for a second, because just the other day, I posted the cover to that book. I said I wanted to share this with you guys because sometimes it's hard for people to pray. Yeah. Because they just don't know how to pray. And I said, this is a wonderful book, because if you don't know how to pray, just read this book and it gets you to that place. And John O'Donohue, and I posted it, and somebody said, they're playing a documentary about John O'Donohue at Banners. And I was like, really? And it was just a weird, auspicious timing. And then you bring him up. So,
let me tell you a beautiful story that I know you will love. I'm so excited that you know him and love him. But what I was going to say is he said, I got to be with him at one point.
You did?
Yeah. And I'll tell you in a second. But he said, just offhandedly, he said, when we're down, when we die, we're down for 100,000 million years. While we're up, we ought to be living like wild people. And so, I came across his book. I gave it as a gift. I honestly got it for someone who is Irish. I found something with a beautiful binding and I cracked it, and it changed my life. He lengthens my spine when I read his works, beautifies my gaze when I look at the world. And he had a retreat in Galway and Connemara.
Oh, wow.
Every year. And I went through undergrad, and not coming from a moneyed family, I put myself through school with scholarships and work and everything. But I told myself, as a gift to myself for my graduation, I would go to Galway. So I put myself through college, got to the end. Of course, I had no money to go to Galway, so, that went away. Then I went back to get my master's degree, and I said to myself, you are going to Galway this time. When you get this degree in your hand, you're going to go celebrate. So I got to the end. Of course, I didn't have any money to go and do that. And then I fell in love with a gentleman. For 10 years, we dated and decided to get married. And he said, where do you want to go on your honeymoon? I said, Galway. I want to go to Galway. And so we decided to make that happen. Well, we decided also a few years prior to the marriage or wedding that it wasn't the right choice. And so I was teaching in this beautiful little college in Columbus, Mississippi. And I didn't have anything in the coffers, really. But I took a check and I wrote the amount for the retreat, which was actually more than I personally had paid for any of my 2 degrees prior. And I didn't have the money for it, so I put it in a frame on the wall and I wrote, you are going to Ireland. And then I started working. I was working for the Judge Judy television show, and I was finding little cases to go on the TV show. The people like Love Triangle, Chickens came over, whatever. And when I just kept working that until finally I was able to take the check out of the frame and I mailed it, and I went on my honeymoon alone to Galway.
Wow.
And stayed in Connemara in little thatch roof cottages. In the mornings we would gather, and he would ask us that we not speak for the first hour of the day. So we were just present in the beautiful Irish landscape. And we did various things, and one day we were going up this mountain, and he said, I'm going to give you a prayer of absolution before you go up. He said, I want you to get rid of, he said, humans are the only creatures that carry things that bleed inwardly. He said, so let those things go before you come up to me for your absolution. He said, I'll send the sins a whistling. You go up the mountain, then we'll talk about death. And so everybody did. Well, I took that very seriously. I sat down, and I imagined that I was like a sonic toothbrush inside of my mind and my soul, thinking of all the things that I think about or loop on that are unhelpful for me and painful or poisonous. And man, I was the last person up there, and he turned around and he saw me and he clapped his hands and he did the thing, and I went up to the top, and he he was going to talk about death. Well, the rain started to come down. It rained so hard. It wasn't raining straight up and down. It was raining sideways. So he said, everybody has to get into this altar. There was an altar carved in the Connemara hillside, ancient. And so this whole band of people crammed in, and he said, does anybody have a song? And one of the women sang this beautiful Irish song. And then he said, anybody else? Well, everybody else was not gonna volunteer themselves, and I will sing, but only if my audience has been drinking lots of wine. So but I said, you know what, I'm gonna I said, I have a song. And he looked at me, you know, with reverence, and I said, this is in honor of my father, Danny Hanemann. He taught this to me when I was 5 years old. And I stood there. I said, I kind of got to get up on my knees a little bit, so I'm standing, I'm up, and I said, I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here is my handle, and here is my... Instead of making the spout, the arm went right down to the hips, and I looked both sides. I said, well, I must be a dang sugar ball. And he looked at me, and then he laughed. We got to the bottom of the mountain. He said, Brooke, he said, I want some priest to go up there doing his priestly things, and then there's a space-time continuum, and he sees teapot up there. And he laughed about it. Well, a couple days later, we were going to the Cliffs of Moher, and I realized I was on the bus that I had left my scarf, so I ran to get it. Ran back, and I heard my name. I turned around, and it was John O'Donohue. He said, get in the car. He said, the bus is full. So I got in the car, and I got to spend an hour and a half with him just driving.
What a treasure. I mean, really.
It was, and we talked about, I was looking at going into a PhD program at that point, and I told him, he asked me what my dissertation was. I told him, and he said, well, can I be on your committee? I said, what? He said, yeah, you can have people within the university and without be on your committee. I said, I think I could probably find a place for you, yes. And so then we're driving down the road a little bit more, and he started talking about baptism. And I said, I think that's the most beautiful, important, weighty tradition, ceremony that you could ever do. And I've always yearned to do that. My mother was, I was born in 1975, so my mom was a flower child. She gave me a kind of a ceremony herself, but I'd never done that through the church. And I told him, I've always wanted to. The only thing that hangs me up is I said, I feel like our spirituality and God is so personal and huge, and there is nothing more important. I said, and the only reason I haven't had that ceremony is because I'm afraid to walk into a place of worship and have them believe that I think everything they believe is true, because I don't believe that you can tell another person you're going to be damned.
Yeah, and especially if you're having to make a profession before your baptism or something, then you're in a situation like that, yeah. And
so I said, I honestly believe it's all the same. I believe that I believe it's all the same, and I believe all the wars and, the violence that has come from religion, it's all love, and it's all massively important and beautiful. And he looked at me in the rearview mirror and he said, Brooke, do you want me to baptize you?
Did John O'Donohue baptize you?
John O'Donohue baptized me.
Are you kidding me?
On the honeymoon that I went to alone in
Brooke,
Ireland.
I'm actually kind of bowled over. I mean, it's like you just took my breath away. For someone to just read a book on my end, and know very little about the man himself, to actually hear that, wow. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just kind of stunned.
I was stunned too. Yeah. It was so personal and beautiful. It was a ceremony in the thatch roof cottage on the last day that we had there. And, he called me a teapot in my baptism. It was that personal. Wow. I could not have scripted that film if you know.
I mean, that's the Creator looking directly at you. I could jump all over the place with this, but I sometimes think when there is a lack of faith, and I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about a lack of faith or even a belief in a Creator, I think it gets muddled up. I was talking to my son about this a while back, and he said, the universe is just so big. There's so much. How could there be anything that cares about me? And I said, well, I get why you see that, because you see yourself as a speck. I said, but think about the last time you had compassion for a speck. Did you ever have compassion for an ant or a fly or a mosquito? And he was like, okay. And he's trying to follow me. And I said, well, reverse the lens. in this expanse of creation, this speck of a planet.
Right.
And then you particularly, just a blink in existence, are actually particularly cared about. That's incredible.
Right.
That is opens up and cracks open a kind of love and compassion that is just beyond comprehension. And
Right.
you saying that, and that's John O'Donohue. There's God right in front of you in that moment, looking at you and calling you teapot.
And I'm happy, I know it.
You've probably heard me mention filming videos, building websites, creating logos, or building brands on this podcast. Well, there's a good reason for that. I'm a brand builder, and my brand is Parker Brand Creative Services. My team and I have built countless brands in the Gulf Coast region, and a lot of our work in the travel and tourism industry is experienced across the country and honestly the whole world. We have our specialties: web, logo, package, and whole brand design, as well as video production and photography. But the reality is, we function as a full-service advertising agency to businesses that don't really mesh well with larger advertising agencies or just don't want to have in-house creative departments. But don't listen to what I say. Just go to our website, parkerbrandup.com, and take a look at what we do. We're a show it, don't say it team. Okay, you should definitely say it too, but you know what I mean. That's parkerbrandup.com. We think sideways, we push forward, and we'll get your brand up.
So take this, you've earned it, a melody in chorus.
Just the fact that my mom used to always say, we're all of us walking each other home. We're all of us just walking each other home. That might be Ram Dass. I'm not sure who it is. But that kind of resonates with me. It resonates with me personally in raising children and also in working in the arts. You know, if we can reach out to the people that are around us and shed some goodness and shine some goodness continuously, you know, don't squander any opportunity that you have to recognize something good in another person. One of the humans, there's so many amazing humans in my life, but there was a woman named Trudy Bruner. She was a theater director. That woman could find something beautiful in absolutely anything she looked at. And I look at so many of us get, you know, glommed onto I'm going to critique this, but she could find the goodness in everything. And I try to kind of do the same thing and to realize that everyone around us, even, you know, it's easy to love the ones that are like-minded. And the challenge comes whether, you know, whatever your religion is or belief system is, that it probably has something to do with being a better person, being the best kind of a human that you can be. So if you find yourself gearing yourself up towards judging someone else, what can you do that can give compassion instead?
Yeah, that takes a little work.
It's hard.
It is.
It's so easy to say, and it is very, very difficult to put into place.
I was tested by that recently. I mean, because I profess nonviolence and peace and compassion, and I profess them as a way of life because I want those things.
Right.
But I fail and fall on my face, and especially when I'm tested.
Okay.
And then in the last month, I was tested in that regard, and I tried to put the philosophies to the test in a situation that normally I would say the standard would be to roll up your sleeves and ball up your fist type of situation, which I don't. I'm not going to say that that's never.
It's just not your highest choice.
It's not my choice.
Right.
I'd rather not be that person.
Right.
But so I tried peace and nonviolence, and it didn't work. It actually went off the rails the opposite direction, and I've meditated on that. The interaction didn't bother me as much as the thoughts that I've had afterwards, because it's complicated my thinking on it. You know, it hasn't changed my belief or my resolution to try again.
Right.
But it has made me realize that it's not as cut and dry as I want it to be. I want to believe that it's an overpowering force. And I still do believe it is. Love is. But love is slow.
It is.
And it's like nature. It grows, right?
Right. And those moments of perceived failure, or where you think you missed the mark, or where you maybe didn't make the choices, or maybe you made the choices outwardly, but inside you're on some kind of a loop with what you wish you had said, you know?
Yeah, right.
In those moments, though, I think it strengthens. I think those moments are necessary to strengthen the kind of living that you want to do. And I think that, you know, we fail and sometimes we get smashed down, but kinsukuroi, put the pieces of the pottery back together, laden it with gold, and realize that
what are the odds you're going to bring
stronger.
that up? We just talked about that yesterday on the podcast. The gentleman that was on the podcast, he brought it up as well.
Did he?
Yeah.
That's my mascot, kinsukuroi.
Yeah. And my wife as well. It's important to her as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the cracks and the suffering and the pains, we all have them, and those are the pure gold sometimes. Right. That's the place that those are the things that I dive into to get my blessings or wounds, Right. I don't want to live in the pain, but I do know that that's where their treasures, most of the time, they're stored and stitched up inside those old scars.
Right. They are. That's where your opportunities for growth are.
Well, and then, people like John O'Donohue, in these circumstances where there is a conflict or where you need to try and you want to be better, one thing I have to remind myself is that I have masters all around that I can go to for advice, and he's one of them. I don't have to stay in my own head about this.
Yeah.
I think it's a good exercise to do it, but when I can forget that. I can go, why am I have to kind of shock myself out of it, like a Zen master come whack me in the head with a stick while I'm meditating and go, stop meditating. I need to sometimes have something do that, because I have to remember I have a library. Right? Why do I have a library? Because I have my masters here.
That you go back
and I can go to them for advice and hear the words. And most of the time, if I listen, there's something there.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
And sometimes it comes in a jazz song on the radio. And sometimes
That's right.
It comes in a play that you walk into that you've seen before, but all of a sudden it hits you.
Well, even just the church side. I mean, I unfortunately, and this is judgment, but I've tended to kind of just disregard those most of the time, because it's like cleverness, and I guess in advertising, writing headlines, I'm not a huge fan of cleverness anymore. I've kind of grown out of trying to be funny and clever, and so I like direct more. And but the other morning, there's one around the corner from my son's school, and what it says is, and I read it every morning now, and I love it. It says, God didn't bring you this far just to leave you here. And I don't know where it comes from. I'm sure it's from somewhere, but I like that. It's a reminder that I don't have to stay in that spot, that the journey's not over. There's still stuff to do. There's still changes to be made, still working, becoming, I
think it all does come back to, the guarding your mind. So many poets and philosophers, John O'Donohue, plays songs. The message comes back again and again. You are in control of your mind. You are in control of your mind, and your mind makes your reality in a way that scientists have been able to find and substantiate. It's not a theory, but in actual fact, I think there was a study. It was, I want to say it was Olympic athletes. If it wasn't Olympic athletes, it was some other high-end group of athletes, but they hooked their bodies up to electrodes. And they had them go through whatever their physical, if they were a javelin thrower, if they were a high jumper, and they looked at where the brain lit up when they went through each step of their movement. And so after they did that, they took these same athletes and they again hooked them up with electrodes, but in this time in a darkened room, and they put them through kind of a stilling kind of meditation kind of exercise to where they could really, really focus. And then they had them go through in their mind every step, not just kind of like, I'm imagining throwing the javelin, but you put your foot down, your foot is in the dirt, you move your heel to steady yourself, you go back and you feel your arm engage and move forward. And they realized, they watched the brain, and they put the two scans next to each other, and they saw that the brain lit up in the same places when they were physically doing it and when they were imagining doing it.
Interesting.
And the implications of that, you could talk about that all day long, but one of the huge implications of that is your brain does not know the difference between the actual action of something and you thinking it through. So what does that mean when we're sitting there thinking about how much we can't stand our, ex-boyfriend, or how much we hate politics, or, all of the hate and all of the anger, or all of the, if you're sitting there disparaging yourself, I'm too fat, I'm too ugly, I'm too poor, my relationship isn't good, I hate my job. Whether or not, and to what degree those things are actually true in the outside world, they are true in your mind.
Yeah.
Whatever you think is true in your mind. So guard it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that really makes me think about how important some things are to me. if you watch your mind enough, and you can learn what triggers it very easily. And for me, I know I have certain triggers for peace and otherwise. And so I've always noticed, whether it be a sound or a song or a smell, I've learned to try, and I have done this in my life, where I've got certain things that I know are going to trigger peace in me. I have a rose oil that I use when I'm praying on my beads, and I've been doing it for a few years now, and it's associated now. I can smell that. I can just, the minute I put it on my fingers, it brings me into a space. Okay. I like having that tool because I need it, and it helps me guard my mind. Draw from my mind. It's like all the little things that are stored in these pockets of like little good spaces, I can sort of take a bite out of that. Right. Because it's the opposite. The opposite is true. If let's say someone's a client or whatever, a situation with someone is repeating and it's negative, God, you're so right. The minute you start talking about it and obsessing about it and even venting about
looping on it, yeah,
the feeling gets right back into you as if it were happening, even though it's not happening.
Right.
And so you're just kicking the wheel, so to speak. I mean, and keeping it spinning. And I don't like that. Mm-mm. I don't like the way I feel, because I'm just repeating it, and it's not even happening. I have to tell my son that a lot when he's in conflict with folks. I said, you're giving all of your energy back to this situation all over again by reliving it.
Right. It's really true. It's really true.
So all of this that you're talking about, which I love, that's what I love about this show. And the beauty of it is when people listen to this, they get to find out that they may just see banners, right? But they get to find out the heart and soul that just beats behind that. I mean, your whole history, all of your memories, all of these wonderful things, and then pains as well, are all working towards, making that a better program for people.
It's really true. Jody Taylor was on and had that great podcast where you guys were talking, and in that, you discover what is the passion that spurs someone into this position, and if we're coming to it with passion and respect, it's probably because there are things that have lit us up in the past, and we have a desire to light someone else up in return. Snippets and stories and experiences. Gosh, I remember just one story about there was a Shakespeare troupe that was doing a production of The Tempest. I want to say that it was in Oregon, but wherever it was waterside. It was an outdoor production. And The Tempest has a portion in it where there's a kind of a Prospero. He's got magical powers, and he has a slave, a little spirit, a sprite who has to do his bidding, named Ariel. And he at one point tells Ariel, if you do my bidding, I'll set you free. And so in the play, Ariel does and is set free. Well, in the play, that's just what happens. The spirit is set free. We go into the next scene. Well, when you take people who have passion and art and creativity and think outside the box and want to spread that fire and that light for art forward, you get the most amazing art out of it. And in this case, the set was set within a band shell right next to a lake. They timed the play. They started at a certain time, and by the time in the play that the spirit was set free, the sun was going down. So it was that violet light in the sky, and right in that where they were next to that lake, there would be a mist that would settle over the water. And the whole stage was surrounded in trees and fireflies, and underneath, a starry sky, as magical as you could possibly imagine. And so in that moment when Prospero says, you are free, the actor who played the spirit Ariel turned around away from the audience with his back to the audience and just started running towards the water that has the mist over top of it and the violet sky above, and just runs just free. And the audience is thinking, well, he's getting to the edge of the water, so of course he's going to veer right or veer left. He doesn't. He runs over the water. He runs on water and disappears in a mist behind him. And what it is was the set designers had put wood about an inch below the water's level, with grips on it so the actor wouldn't slide. And the actor actually ran on water into the mist and was surrounded.
That's incredible.
You take one person's passion in the play that they wrote or the song that they wrote. You take another person's passion and the skill that they've learned to become the guitarist or the artist or the dancer or the actor. You marry those together and then tell a story that expands our understanding of humanity. And I believe that if you're in the audience or if you're hanging the lights or if you're volunteering at the front desk, the more that you get exposed to this art and see all of this humanity, the more it becomes difficult not to be tolerant. We become tolerant when we start to see other people's passions. And I don't know, going back to banners and going back to the work that Jesse does and Jody does and all of the volunteers that have been with us for decades or, years or whatever, just everyone's putting together something to spread that. I think it's...
I listening to you, a thought just occurs to me that, art and creativity will save the world. It'll save us. It'd save our creature. It really would. I mean, so much of what we do in this world isn't about that. But when we get to enter those places, we feel different.
Yeah.
And somebody on the show, I can't exactly remember who, said that everybody's creative in some way.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that's true, that creativity manifests itself in so many ways. But, by calling one thing art and creativity and the other not, we sort of limit that again,
Sure.
And if it were seen broader, I guess, and the definition of what creativity was broader, and not just in the arts, I think that we'd have a more peaceful world. I think you'd see art and science working together in harmony.
Right.
Because in my worldview, I don't see a difference. I really don't. I mean, there was a photograph, my family and I were in 1911, and there was a macro photograph of a snowflake molecule. And it had been digitally touched up, but we just stood there and looked at it. And I told my wife, I said, I can't look at this and go, that's neat. I could stare at this all day and comprehend the design of this.
Yeah.
Now,
The
on one
impossible
hand, you'd
design
say
of that.
it's science. That's a molecule. Someone had to have a piece of scientific equipment to look at this,
capture that,
right? But on the other hand, it's in an art gallery for a reason, because it is art, and
Right.
it's just this deep, deep code of creativity.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't look at anything now and not see that. And I mean, I almost have to delude myself, I think, to sometimes navigate the standard, right?
Yeah.
I have to delude myself that that's who I have to be. That it's like two people.
How do you mean?
Well, like put on a certain set of eyes and clothes to navigate the world of timelines and clocks and all that kind of stuff, right? Because there's... Sure. And when I was younger, I would say I probably slipped into the other state more often. But now what it is I have to like...
More conservative on
I
that.
have to choose to go into that, because I much prefer the magical, creative world.
Right.
That is not, talking wires and power lines and, things like the TikTok of things.
Right.
I like the natural cycle. I like the pace of it. I think it is the pace we were designed for, not the pace we live at.
Correct.
And the pace we live at can steal us away from things like that.
Oh yeah, you, all of a sudden you realize you have your foot in your grave, and it's like, wait a second.
Yeah, right.
That was really important stuff I should have been doing.
That's right. I mean, you would, again, bring it back to banners. It gives people a moment to step away from the grave, so to speak, right? And step into that world of creativity.
And then you look at, again, what's important, what kind of effect are you having? Our first production is Josephine Baker. I got a chance to do a lecture at the Sage series a couple days ago on Josephine Baker's life. And, this is the first woman of color born in America that became an international superstar. She left and she lived in St. Louis, saw the riots and the lynchings and the murders, was, in the state of our country in that time, completely not at leisure to live freely. And then at 19, got on a boat, went over to Paris, stepped off the streets, and and all of a sudden is not only accepted but sought after, and then turned around to use her celebrity in this most amazing way. She was the only woman to speak on the March at Washington with Martin Luther King Jr. And her words, I've said them so many times, but they're so powerful. She said, I have walked into the palaces of kings and queens. I have walked into the homes of presidents, and I cannot walk into a hotel in the country I was born and get a cup of coffee.
Wow.
And so then you take this person who was born in 1906, who's forgotten by the younger generation largely, except for maybe a social studies class where they had to, make a flashcard to memorize something for a test and then, purge that file. And then we have a one-woman show where that woman is being embodied, that you get to see this person who was such a force. And I think that art can bring us back to that, And then, just honoring what's important. We've got, there's another gentleman, Abdullah Ibrahim, he's coming. And within 9 days of being on our stage, he will literally be on the stage of the Kennedy Center getting the award from the National Endowment for the Arts for Jazz Master. And there is no higher award in our nation. And
Wow.
we get to have that on stage.
Right here.
In Lake Charles for $20 a ticket.
Yeah.
This is a legend, And so for me, it's so humbling to know that, and I could go on and on about the whole series, which I won't, but it's so humbling to know that what we're doing, what Jody and Jesse and I and the founders of the festival and Dr. Brickell and everybody are doing is, honoring history, putting art out there, putting out lectures, putting out documentaries, and just again reminding us of the paths that some people have taken, what can happen when you give your passion enough time to learn the chords and the fret changes, and when you honor your art. And so it's just really exciting.
I'm sitting here listening to you, and I know our company worked on the poster, and
Your poster is so beautiful.
but it's interesting, and it's I have to admit I'm kind of ashamed because I'm probably like a lot of people. So often with events or things like banners or anything, someone has worked so hard to tailor this lineup and work to get these connections and bring in these people. Each one of these people is an egg that you can just crack open that's full of their own history and beauty.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And yet, for most of us consumers, unless we have a particular interest in one of them, yeah, it's a name on a list. Right. It's a lineup.
Right.
We don't realize that each one of those names, and I'm guilty again. I mean, I see the names, I typed them out.
Yeah.
But to dive into each one of them, and you just talked about a couple.
2 out of 18.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably go on and on about them.
Oh yeah, we
and
could
so,
be here for days.
But it's a painting of a person, right? Their art themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just makes me realize how sad it is that we just. And I don't know. I don't know if it's just something that's because of the pace of the world, again, the time.
It's
but
the pace of the world.
do we have time to sit and dive in and go?
We don't.
Let me look at each one of these people and really see what because that's high value what y'all are bringing.
Oh, it is. And how
high cultural value.
How do you express that to people? You go through you do the press releases, you do the the TV, you do the ads, you do the posters, you do the flyers, you do all these things, and yet as consumers, and I'm guilty of it too, I see it on the wall and I'm like, okay, that looks kind of cool. Don't know much about it. Got to go get my kid. Got to go do my blah blah, and you don't know. But there's another. I think of the play called Six Guitars. That's part of the series. This is one man who has a chair and a guitar. That's all the production value of the show. That man plays 6 different characters who each play 6 different genres of guitar. So he plays classical, he plays rock and roll, he plays blues, and with each one, as a physical actor, not just a musician, he's able to use his face and his voice and his body to embody these humans and these souls. If you closed your eyes when he's playing, the blues man, you would think that you were looking at an African American of about 70 years old. When you open your eyes, he's a little ginger-headed, white-skinned, young, 30-something guy, but he has invested so much in being able to become that, become
Yeah.
that person. And in that show, I look at that and I'm like, okay, nobody knows who this actor is. I'm bringing gold to the stage, but who's going to know and who's going to come,
Yeah.
And how do I reach people? And I think that's why, like, things like being able to work with the Sage series and partner with people, that's, a room of 100 people and maybe some will come out. But if you keep on speaking and keep on going out and keep on trying to partner with people and just make people aware of things,
Yeah.
it'll be there.
I think that realistically, and that's again talking about this show, why I think it came to be, is I think people are hungry for deeper dives, to actually have the whole meal and not just to smell it.
Right.
And I think it's making that time and knowing that that's out there, because all the things you mentioned, and I think about this from our perspective too in media and marketing, those are the things that everybody's doing,
Right.
doing the press releases and doing the billboards and doing the print ads and all that stuff. And that stuff is, you need it for general awareness.
Right.
But beyond general awareness, there has to be a format.
How do you get them
Yeah.
in? Yeah.
I mean, so somebody can really taste it and go, I
Right.
want that.
That's, it's not, in a previous incarnation in my life, I was a professor for 5 years up in Columbus, and I loved, you would teach within the theater department. I had all my classes. I loved teaching all of those, but they're the larger, like, theater appreciation course where you have 400 kids or 300 kids in there, and so many professors hate those courses. I absolutely loved them.
Really?
Because you would stand in front of them and you would give them, this is what this person did. This is Shakespeare. If you don't think you like Shakespeare, it's because you had a bad teacher in grade school.
Yeah.
If you don't understand like how just overwhelmingly beautiful that canon is, it's because somebody didn't have passion and shame on them.
Yeah.
And then being able to give that to them, or being able to give them, The Crucible, which was, written about the Salem witch trials, but it was written during the McCarthy trials, and it was the only way that the playwright could talk about what was happening with the Red Scare, is that by couching it in Salem witch trials. We're not
Yeah.
talking about now, how art can do that, and giving them, different pieces of things they would never have seen or known about. I was talking just the other day at work about a play that I love. It's called Marat Sade is the short version of it, but it's called, the full title is The Persecution and Assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, as performed by the inmates of the Asylum of Charenton under the direction of the Marquis de Sade. And it's a play about inmates of an insane asylum putting on a play about the French Revolution. And each one of those characters has a parallel, like the person who plays Jean-Paul Marat, who, started the revolution in large part. He died in his bathtub with a skin condition. He was played by a paranoid schizophrenic undergoing hydrotherapy.
Wow.
And this is a play that you could spend a whole lifetime just looking at this play, but you got a room full of 200 kids who watch, YouTube videos all day.
Sure.
They've never heard of anything like that,
Yeah. It is kind of a shame, and I don't want that for my children. Because it's hard to just isolate them though from the world and what's out there, because everybody else is consuming it and
Yeah.
it becomes the norm. But
And as soon as you take it away, it becomes more interesting. So
yeah, right. My son's kind of had a little experiment with that in the last 8 weeks. He did like a social media fast completely, technology
How
fast. 15.
Yeah.
And he's just been fascinated by his own mind and
Yeah.
what it did to him. He was like, it's almost made him a little disgusted a little bit towards it, jaded towards social media and stuff like that. But he, I don't know, it was just interesting conversations we were having, the things that he was having revelations about. And I was like, this is good.
Yeah.
But it made me think of when I was his age, or even when I was in my 20s, when I would read a book. There are certain books, and I keep them with me, believe it or not. I keep copies in a bag. I carry it everywhere I go, because it's the books that I remember where I was when I finished it.
Right.
And those books, I mean, you can, you say, whether it's a book by John O'Donohue, for me, The Prophet was one of those books.
Right.
Be Here Now, Ram Dass, you brought him
Right.
up. That was
Be Here
another
Now,
one of those
yeah.
books that, like, when I turned to the last page, it's stuck. I'm like, I can still smell the room I was sitting in or where I was at, because it just leaves an imprint.
Right.
But I had time and space for that imprint to be made. In the last 20 years of my life, I can say that the pace has completely changed. I mean, I keep talking about pace. I don't know why I'm hung on that today, but I guess listening to you, you started off just describing those memories, and I realize as I'm listening to you that takes time to form, and we have to give children and people, not just children, people time to form those memories, to build an attachment to something, and for it to sink in and dye them,
Right. I love it. Yeah.
To fully saturate who they are. So when they need those things, those books, poems, encounters with people, they're not just cars in the fast lane just swooping by.
Right.
I don't know. And banners, I keep bringing banners back because I guess trying to make that connection to it locally, that's really what I see. And I'm guilty, of letting banners be in the fast lane or on the side lane, swooping by. I'm guilty of not paying attention to what's been right in front of me.
I think we all are at some time or another. This is, though, as a team, this is our first season that we've built. And so this is a passion project. We're starting with Josephine. We've got 6 guitars. We've got Billy Strings, who's coming and playing bluegrass, who's known for breaking multiple strings in one song because that's how much he's got in him, And then we had the big, fun, fiery, Red Hot Chili Pipers, the bagpipe rock and roll, because you don't want to just go for the jugular all the time. You have to have the light and the levity also. And, incredible lectures. Just, there's a Professor Bullhoff from McNeese. He's going to talk about his mother and how she was a famous philosopher. And then there's a gentleman from New Orleans who I can't wait to see his lecture, William April. He was an NOPD officer for, I think, 20 years, decorated. And in his lecture, he talks about what does it take for a mind like yours and mine, a normal functioning brain, to shift into that of a violent perpetrator, a violent criminal. And then once that happens, how does that person then find the lines into their victims? And where do you align with that or not align with that?
Yeah.
And so, there's just
interesting
thing after thing after thing like that within the series. It's no one person is going to like everything, but that's like life. You're not going to like every TV show or every film you see, but man, if you invest some time in it, there's no greater return, and I know it sounds like an advertisement or whatever, but literally $80 you get a ticket to every single one of those events. I think it comes down to $5 an event. You're going to see Abdullah Ibrahim. You're going to see like a show that won 9 Best of Fests in the International Fringe Circuit, and then we're bringing in Puddle's Pity Party too. That's the last one that hasn't been announced within the larger season.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah, I get Puddle's Pity Party. Yeah, I've been seeing the promos for that.
And that, I've heard has been the best show that some people that I trust very much have ever seen in their life. He breaks the fourth wall and directly connects, and I'm so excited to meet him too, because he will not, when he is in costume, he will not speak. He just exudes backstage, he
really?
Just is, in this space, and he opens his mouth and sings like, Pavarotti, but sings songs like Chandelier, and does it in a way where you're looking at the pain and the agony and the need, of a soul, and how that can touch you, and other people might be like, 7-foot clown, that's weird, but it's like, no, calm down, sit in the audience, please,
Yeah, it's interesting. It's making me just think, and I guess, again, selfishly, I'm the one who gets to hear this information first, before we launch it, but I love what it's doing to me listening to you talk about this way, because I'm sitting here going, as a parent,
oh my God,
as a parent, I owe this to my 15-year-old.
Oh my Lord.
Because what he's going to get exposed to, this could be just this one season. If I bring him to 50% of that,
right, 3 shows, 4 shows,
he's going to be going,
wow.
I mean, he's at that junction in his life where he's trying to figure out what he's going to do for the rest of his life. He's an artistic, kind of creative-minded child, socially, aware, but he doesn't know for sure. He's got all these decisions in front of him. He could go be exposed to that and like have his honeysuckle moment, and go, I saw the thing that made me shift my rudder towards this thing 30 years from now, he's telling his kids about it.
Yeah.
And going, yeah, I remember my dad took me to this. Yeah. And that ties to all of y'all and what you've done in your history. I just love that.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Put that child like up in the fourth row, like center, and let that wash over him.
Yeah.
Because especially our children, they're so used to digital experiences, whether it's social media, video games, television, blah, blah. There's not the human body in front of you.
Yeah.
And there's no way to translate a live human body onto film. We can film things, but you don't feel that. You don't feel the resonance in your bones. I remember last season sitting and watching Arturo Sandoval. He's a 10-time Grammy Award winner. And it was my first couple of months with Banners, and we got the show up, and I sat backstage, stage right, just sat on the floor with my knees under my chin, and I was sitting there watching through the wings this legend, and watching, just close enough to touch right there. And just, I sometimes wish that I could just put my hand on somebody's shoulder and get the whole of their life experiences.
That's so funny. I do too. I think that's
a superpower that I wish that I could have. And same thing with buildings. I want to touch, 1911 downtown Lake Charles and know everything that's happened. But, the chance to be in the room with things, it's just magnificent, and it's important, and it helps people, especially the age of your son, who are looking to try and find things. I also say get them involved in arts no matter what.
Yes.
And I tell my students, when I was teaching acting, I'm not looking for everyone to become an actor. That's not realistic. We're not going to all become actors. Mm-hmm. But I can promise you that nothing that you are learning right now will not serve you in your life. Because communicating with people, being able to articulate your inner passions and needs and thoughts, being able to make eye contact, being able to use your body to communicate something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that you have to, endeavor to be on Days of Our Lives. This is going to come in handy. One day you're going to go to a job interview. Those skills come in handy.
They do.
One day you're going to fall in love with somebody and you're going to want to ask them out on a date. That's going to come into play. One day you might get pulled over for speeding and try to talk yourself out of the ticket. Those skills come into play, being able to communicate and be real and be in your body and talk, It's just art is never a waste of time.
I totally agree. I mean, it came up on the podcast yesterday, and I actually can't wait for that one to launch, so it's relevant to what you're saying. But the guest and I were talking about a teacher that had affected us both at two different time periods in our life, but in the same way and kind of through the same methods. But it was related to acting and speaking. And if I hadn't had that teacher at that particular time in my life, and share those skills and her knowledge with me, and then push a little bit too to keep the interest high, the encouragement up, I wouldn't be sitting here talking.
That's what I was just
with
thinking.
you.
This conversation
would not happen because I would still probably be leaps and bounds behind trying to become a person,
right?
And get into my comfort zone still.
Right.
So yeah, being able to communicate, I learned the value of that from that person through acting, because it was speech and theater. Yeah. And, it is valuable. It really, really is. Because I find even in my job, I can tell when I'm communicating with somebody that is not comfortable with communicating.
Right.
And I don't mean that as a slight to them, but I go, someone never taught them in a healthy way the value of communicating.
Right.
Whether it be in written form or face-to-face.
Right.
And that it's okay to communicate.
Yeah.
The other thing, I think maybe people don't feel as safe anymore.
They don't.
Because there's a place for someone to attack you now.
Sure.
It's sort of like there's a place for people to sabotage you. You and I could talk.
Yeah.
And share personal things, and then I can go sabotage you online.
Sure. Yeah.
And use everything you've told me as a weapon.
Right.
When you live in that world, it makes it people are a little more afraid.
Absolutely.
I really do think they are. So building up a brand around yourself is a way to create sort of a facade so people feel like they can't penetrate that, because you have this sort of brand vanguards all around you.
Right.
And I don't know. I like that. I like truth and directness not in a negative way, but just plain honesty and truth. I don't know. I think there's just a great value in that that's perhaps even being lost.
Oh yeah.
We're forgetting how to communicate. One thing I was talking about with my wife, I was telling her that I recently watched a documentary on Amazon, the Kalchakra mandala I don't think that's the actual name of the documentary. The name of the documentary is called Chakra. I don't know if you're probably familiar with it. The Tibetan sand mandalas that they build.
Sure, yeah.
So this whole documentary was about the whole Kalchakra ceremony that the Dalai Lama does, but it was intertwined with a woman's personal story about death. You know, how her whole life had lost someone in her life when she was young, and it's haunted her whole life, and she's never really made peace with it. And so she was kind of going through the Tibetan culture in the foothills, you know, of the Himalayas to try to get a grasp on this. They use the Kalchakra as a part of that. But what part I'm getting to, I'm telling you that because it's a good documentary.
I'm writing it down right now.
But Tibetan Buddhists debate. Have you ever watched them debate? It's a part of their spiritual training.
No.
And it's not to argue. And I love it. I love it so much. I could watch them do it all day long, because two people will sit across from each other, two monks, and one monk will pose a question to the monk across from him, and then they claps his hand like this as a signal that I am through and I'm handing my question to you.
Yeah.
He's not going to say anything until you have had a moment to think about it, and then you respond, but then you give him an answer, but you also ask another question, and then he pops it back to you. And they'll do this, and they're smiling the whole time, but they're challenging each other.
Right.
And I told my wife, I said, there's something beautiful about that's lost today. The joy of debate and the joy of having your mind changed.
Engaging and
getting new information and going, oh, I didn't have all the pieces. You know, maybe I need to consider something new. Yeah. And add to, and it's just this beautiful energy. I don't know. It almost made me cry. And they were laughing and having a good time. Right. And I thought, we don't do this.
Right. And I think it goes back to just protecting yourself. You know, just you go through your life and you create this thick skins, and you have your walls, and then you're depleting yourself from an experience. I think of my personal life, you know, in relationships. When I met my husband, I had decided that I was very happy in my life and was very fulfilled with my child and my job, and didn't need anyone around me. And when he asked me to go out with him, it wasn't until I found out that he had been a nuclear specialist that I would even go out with him, because I knew that he was vetted and was not crazy. You know, I knew that the government might let you fight in the trenches if you're crazy, but they're not going to let you handle the nuclear weapon. So
that's pretty funny.
Okay, I'll go out on a date with you. But I had, you know, that poor, beautiful man had so many mountains to climb, because I had decided I was absolutely finished, you know. And I look at my experience in my life right now, and it's like, oh, I'm so wildly blessed by this person and their different opinions, and you know, we're open to changing each other's minds about things, you know, holding hands or marrying or having a child.
It's so funny you bring that up. My wife and I've had this conversation too, because I feel like we have a pretty pleasant relationship. I mean, and compared to relationships I'd had previous to her, there wasn't like I hate to say energy vampire, but I felt depleted many times, back like an ebb and a flow and a back and a forth and a stealing and a giving. It was just a lot of that. Right. But with her, I've never felt that, not once. And so we've, over the years, we've talked about this. And so the illustration we've come up with is, most of us are sort of like half circles, and we're looking for the other half of our circle, right? But the minute that we do that, we start sort of feeding off of the other one. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to last, because the circuit, you might be moving one way around the circle and the other one's the other way, and there's just sparks. Yeah. And then when that person's gone, you only have half a circle still, and so then you're hungry again for another person, you know. Right. But when you're in a relationship where you've got two circles, they can kind of come together and make this sort of infinity loop, and it's sort of harmonious. They make a new thing. Yeah. You know, and so that feels more like the way the relationship has been. She's still who she is. I'm who I am.
It's so nice to be able to be yourself. Then that's the freedom that I just have come to experience, that it wasn't a part of my life before, you know, and it's just, it makes all the difference in the world. And then it opens you up. You know, there's a question sometimes about, like, where are all the Michelangelos these days? Like, what happened that we don't have a Da Vinci and a Galileo? Like, you know, and, you know, some of the kind of thoughts is, I feel is like, it's because people don't feel free to be themselves, and they're not supporting of each other. They're, you know, and I think that once you get around someone where you can be free and be yourself, it makes all the difference in the world. I think it's a huge,
that's huge interesting. not, to tie it back to the guest from yesterday, he said something very similar, related. He said, just in the last 3 years, that he finally allowed himself to be himself, and stopped being afraid of that. And he said everything has changed.
Oh yeah, your health gets better. You don't have as many colds. It's
Sure.
just huge.
Yeah, well, you get to kind of not breathe behind that sort of suffocating cellophane mask.
Right.
I mean, that's moist and hot and heavy, and who wants to live like that?
Right.
I mean, I've lived like that before.
Watched or tracked, or feeling that you have people around you who are just waiting for you to fall into a trap or a hole. It just when you're free of that, it's a pretty amazing thing.
If you don't mind, I want to kind of jump back. Something's just been kind of in my mind this whole time.
Sure.
And we don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but you were describing what happened with your parents, and then you were also pregnant.
Yeah.
So I just can't escape this idea that in this very short span of time, you're dealing with birth and death at the same time.
Yeah.
What did it change you?
Oh,
or did it just make you, I guess, is that a hinge moment?
It has changed me for sure. It has definitely changed me. I had not had the experience of losing my parents, and I've lost both of them. One who is no longer breathing, and the other one who is trapped into dementia. And I don't know of anything. I can't wrap my mind around that. And it's difficult to walk around in the world, and you're busy with your, at the time this was also happening, I was getting a new staff at Banners. Like, we had a complete overhaul with that. And so there was that gigantic, responsibility that was there too. And I have had things in my life happen that required a great deal of resilience. And I've always felt, I don't like people to brag about themselves too much, but I have been proud of the fact that I'm resilient. And this thing had me on my knees, like just on my knees. And, I turned to someone, and said, it's fun because I walk around and my acting training comes into great play. I have been classically trained as an actor, and I can stand in a boardroom and I can have a conversation, and we can talk numbers, and we can talk, sponsorships, and we can, laugh and joke, and I can, have all this time, and then I can get into my car and sob so much I can't even, drive. And then it comes to me, it's like, why do, we are having to lessen who we are, because we can't be emotionally honest in every moment, or else we'd have snot on our faces at a sponsorship meeting. You can't do that. You have to be able to hold yourself and carry yourself. I'm grateful for acting training because of that. But having gone through birth and death, and what feels to me to be way worse than death, which is dementia, and to have bring a child into the world on top of that, it's just staggering. It makes it difficult for you to be drawn into petty things, for one thing, and it just makes you really appreciate that humans are jewels. Humans are jewels, and we have armies of them around us that we are ridiculously blessed by, and it's important to let them know that, it's important to never waste an opportunity.
God, that just cuts right to the heart of, I think, what I mentioned earlier about why I think when I tried peace and honesty and nonviolence, why it stung so bad. Because you just sort of said that. I felt like we were both missing, me and the person I was in conflict with, we're missing that pearl of great price, right? I mean, I was like, in my mind, I was like, can't you see I'm your brother? Not like literally, but like, can't you see you have an ally down right here? Like, I actually love you. Can't you see? And I felt like it was just this treasure was being...
Pearls before swine.
We were just throwing it away for the sake of what? For conflict? And I just couldn't understand. And I mean, I think that's why it's been so heavy for me these last weeks, because I don't understand the value of the conflict versus the value in just being okay and going, we actually are just people too.
Right.
And I don't have hate towards you or anything. So I don't know. It's just a strange thing. I'm still carrying it. I can tell I'm still carrying it. Yeah.
I think that, I have had one challenge in my life along those lines, that the damage that came from the interaction of this individual is so profound, and I have had to do a lot of work on that, and I think that it's a cliche, but I think that it's also true, because if you're playing Cruella de Vil in a movie, or Adolf Hitler, your performance of that human being is going to be it's going to be a facade, one-dimensional, if you don't understand who that person is. And so you have to see, why is this person doing this? Why are they not accepting the gift of peace and insisting on the gift of conflict and antagonism and unkindness? And then you have to realize there's no way, you can't magically get into their head, but something has happened to that individual to make them into what they are. Nothing in nature just plops out of the sky. A polished stone has been in the water for a very long time. It was rough. It got that way, and it truly is because of that friction. And sometimes I think when you look at artists like Tennessee Williams or Josephine Baker or any blues singer or so many, it's the pressure of the negativity that makes the diamond. And if it hadn't been for that pressure, if Tennessee Williams had lived in a time where homosexuality was A-okay, then would we have the amazing plays that we have in our American theater canon? I don't know that we would. If the blues, the great blues singers of our time did not have poverty and illness and pain and violence in their lives, would we have those songs? Would Mama Cass have had anything to say? Would Jimi Hendrix have had anything to play? I don't know that we would. And so there's gifts, and that's something John O'Donohue would always say, there's gifts just below the surface of everything.
I mean, it's the Buddhist no mud, no lotus.
Right.
I mean, it really is. It's easy to forget, but
daily.
But it is the truth, isn't it?
It is.
It really is. God, makes me think of my own father's passing. Ugly death and illness. Drawn out deterioration, and how painful that was to everybody in the family, especially my mother and my sisters. And, that was a pressure cooker. It was that pressure that you're talking about. And I remember, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I remember the feeling it shaping me. It wasn't just like something in retrospect.
Yeah.
It was very much in the moment. Took on the role of an observer.
Yeah.
And I think that honestly probably was my maybe protection, survival mechanism. I don't know, whatever it was good. Yeah. It didn't function to shield me necessarily, but it allowed me to navigate those waters. And in the process, it was like I was sitting on a ship watching it happen, and I was able to feel it without being crushed by it. Right. In fact, the irony in the little symbols around someone's death. I don't know if that's happened to you, where things just seem to auspiciously arise and sort of begin to orbit in your life around a person. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was that way with my dad. My dad and I had a connection of comic books was our thing. And when I had to write his, it was obituary, but then also had to write like a eulogy, something to say at his funeral. And I wanted to be honest. I never was a big fan of just sugarcoating something. So I was like, I wrote something about Thor because my dad, that was one of our favorite comic books. And oddly enough, my dad was a carpenter, and I have his hammer that he used his whole life. And so I ended up writing something about that and the hammer and all these things about that, right? And so a lot of things just kept happening with that hammer and symbols of hammers. And so now I wear an iron hammer around my neck. And it's funny what I've come to think about that hammer, because my dad was a pretty aggressive guy. But what's happened is the name of Thor's hammer is Mjolnir, which translates into crusher. And in meditating on that hammer, that sounds pretty violent. It's the crusher, but that's not what it's become for me. What it's become for me is just what you described, the crusher. It's the pressure. It's the moment of death that's really ugly, and it's not crushing you to make you worse.
Forging you.
Yeah, it's forging you into something new and better. And honestly chipping away, maybe like shells on the outside and really making something. It's building something. It's not destroying something.
Right.
I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah, death is just, it's such a fascinating thing that we don't talk about. And I think that's why, I had that child come to me when I was doing Wit in tears, like we're afraid to talk about it. John O'Donohue actually shared a story that has resonated with me, and I will write it into a play one day in honor of him. But he spoke about how, as he was a Catholic priest for I think over 20 years, he was at a lot of deathbeds, and he said there's no higher honor than to be at a deathbed. And he said, and in his career as a priest, he was often at them. And he said there was two, actually. One, he talked about this guy who was an old Bandera. He lived a rough life, and he was just so calm and peaceful. John said, I have to ask you, I've been at many bedsides, but what is it that has you so calm and so jovial in this moment? And he said, life. He said, I got a fair shake out of it. He had lived it, like John O'Donohue saying, when you're down for 100 million years. While you're up, you should be living like wild people. But he recounted another story where he was at the bedside of a woman who was not even 30, I don't think. And she was one of the, Ireland has gypsy, masses in certain areas still. And she was of a gypsy group, and she had children, and she was unexpectedly dying, and it was quick, and she wasn't prepared for it. So he got called to the hospital. He said he walked to the hospital, and he said there was this mass of people that were all around her, and they were going through the rosary top to bottom. He said they would get to the bottom, they would barely take a breath, they would start again. He was like, you couldn't even, it was like he was like trying to walk into a jump rope kind of,
Yeah.
thing. But finally, and he said her eyes were wide with terror, and all these people were just praying around her, and he waited till they got to the end, and he jumped in and he said, thank you for being here, and your prayers and your blessing, and if we could all just maybe step outside for one moment and have a second together. And he brought them out into the hallway, and John said, you're blessing her with your prayers. Let's think for a moment, though, that while all of us are losing her, that one person, she is losing every single one of you.
Yeah.
And so he said, I think it would be quite lovely if we could all go in one at a time and speak love to her, speak to her, and tell her the things that you would want to tell her the things that matter right now. Speak to her, calm her with your voice. He said, if you need to fall apart, he said, wait till you get beyond the threshold of the door, fall apart. He said, we will scoop you up in prayer, and we will be here for you. And he said they did, one after another. They went in, and he said, but before that happened, he went and said that he went to her, and she said, am I dying right now? And she was panicked, and he said, I don't know, but I will let you know if I do. And he went out and said that to the people came in one at a time, and some came out and fell down, and they scooped them up. And at the very end, he went in, and he said she had just this peace that radiated from her, just this calm and this peace. And he sat and he spoke with her for a while, and she had heard all the love. She had heard all the things she needed to. And then she looked at him and she said, will you open the window? Will you open the window? And he said, yes. And now is your time. Right now. And it was like her soul was ready to go out the window. Yeah. He opened the window and she died immediately.
Something beautiful about that with the wind. Today, Lake Charles, the news went out about Brian Moore. I don't know if you knew Brian Moore, but he played guitar. He was a musician. Everyone in the music scene kind of knew the guy. And I woke up this morning and found out he passed away last night. And I don't know how or why, but Brian and I went to junior high school together. And I have some memories of him, more younger memories. We didn't stay in touch over the years, but I knew he was around. I was just glad to know he was around, general comfort of that. But now he's gone, and so I got to work this morning, and it was very windy outside, and I just happened to look at the sun, and it was kind of obscured, and the wind was blowing across it. And, I had that feeling that you just described. It was like there's something about the wind, moving on the bardo of death and just moving into what's next, for him.
Right.
And it was comforting to know that. I don't know what ailed him. But just to know that when the time is not dark.
Right.
I think that death can be dark. It feels dark on the surface, like to look at a skull, a memento mori. It's like that's a scary thing. I mean,
Right.
I don't look at that anymore like that. I
Memento
don't.
mori, I love that.
Yeah, it's not as terrifying. I don't even know, to be honest. I haven't said this on the show, but I don't even know if I believe in it the way that death is even life, death, one or the other. I kind of see them as one thing.
Right.
It's become one thing.
John said something that kind of shocked me. I remember in the moment when he said it, is he said, we think of death as being the ending. And in truth, we don't come back to talk about this experience, so it's all conjecture.
Sure, right, exactly. You
Fervent
can't,
your faith might be.
Exactly.
It's conjecture. He said, but... He said, I truly believe, he said, think about a baby. And I've just had this experience because I have a newborn. She's 5 months old. They lived inside of your body. They heard your heart beat from the inside. They heard the music of your heart. They felt the blood rushing around you. They were wrapped up. They were tight in. They were comforted. They had this very specific experience. And then think about the act of birth. How terrifying of a change is that? He said, birth and death are the same thing. They're the same thing. We're going from one being into something we have no experience about. Once you're out, you can't go back in and tell the other baby, "Oh, this is what's happening." So,
right, right.
But it's the same thing. And
Yeah.
I had this opportunity one time to go and study in Arezzo at the Commedia dell'arte there. I had written a faculty research grant and went there, and this entire the school was held in the farm of the Medicis, the lemon farm of the Medicis, specifically for their limoncello.
Okay.
So that's where.
Now,
the
what is
school,
that? The Medicis.
The Medicis of Italy, who were the ones that founded Da Vinci and ran Italy. So all of the great art, that they were the highest. I can't really liken them to anybody else. The most powerful family.
I see.
That they were the owners of massive movements in art and science anyway, so we were there, and there was a gentleman who had come out. He was so dyslexic he couldn't really read, but he had won the Guggenheim Award, and he was talking about, we don't know what happens in the world, he said, but if you look at what happens internally with a person, and I believe spiritually with a person, he said, look to nature. Nature will show you a parallel into it. And I think that's what John O'Donohue was doing when he was saying, look at birth is death, or look at a caterpillar going into a butterfly, this worm that knows the ground, the smell of dirt, the feel of rain, a leaf, that's the experience of life. And then all of a sudden it is compelled to be constricted into this thing where its body is broken down in a not pretty violent way, broken down and reconstructed into wings. Can you not tell me miracles don't exist if you see a butterfly? I don't know how you can look at a butterfly and ever say, if we pay attention to the world around us, there's wild things. You go from being a worm to being a butterfly. I think that there's a lot of parallels in so many philosophies and religions.
Yeah, no, you're right. You reminded me of this story Thich Nhat Hanh tells in one of his books. I believe the name of the book, it's either No Death, No Birth, or just No Death. I can't remember exactly, but there was a father in Plum Village. There was a young boy who was ill, and his father, after he passed away, his father was just distraught. He missed his child, and he had so many questions about birth and death. And the way Thich Nhat Hanh, the way he comforted him, just stuck with me. He took him out to the cherry blossom grove, or the peach blossoms, and he said, "I want to show you your son." And he brought him out there. And he said, "You see this orchard out here?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Your son worked in the village he would go out and he would raise the money to help plant these trees." And it's hard to even tell the story. I don't know the people, but it just get kind of emotional when I hear it. And I was like, he said, "Every spring your son is here."
Yeah.
And I just love that story.
Yeah. These things are so important. They're so important. I didn't think that after my father passed away that having a ceremony in a church was his style. He was a rabble rouser. He was I called him a redneck Renaissance man. He would drink whiskey and listen to Vivaldi, and he lived hard and was very funny and articulate. And but he raised me in the theater. So I knew I had to have the baby first before I could figure out what to do. So I had my baby, Sophia, and she's just a light of goodness and good humor and wakes up smiling every day and laughing. And after I had her, I said, okay, so I went back to the town that we used to live in on North Shore, and I went to the theater where I did my first play with him, A Streetcar Named Desire. He played Stanley Kowalski. I was a little flower girl. And he and I had been in a show just ourselves later on. And I gathered his friends. I put a chair on stage. I put a fishing pole, a World War II rifle, a mug that said "My favorite people call me Papa," some of the movies that he had done. And I went out to the stage and I poured a glass of whiskey and I shoved the pint of whiskey in the side cushions of his chair, and everybody who knew him laughed because they knew,
Yeah.
And I put that down and I let everybody, come up and tell stories of his life and honor him. And I think that, well, at the end of that experience, actually, my cousin came up to me, and he's an officer up north of Louisiana. And so, you think of an officer of the law as being a pretty, straightforward, not, mystical kind of person. He came up to me and said, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. He pulled me backstage, and he said, this is going to sound really weird to you. He said, but I don't know if you know this, but the Hanemann family, he said they speak to each other with stars. His brother had gone down to Honduras, and he owned a bar down there and had been brutally beaten by the law enforcement down there. And he had lost him, and then he had lost his father too, who was also a sheriff. And he said, anytime I need my dad or I need to talk to them, I go outside. He's like, you can't just go out and look up at the sky. He's like, but every single time I have needed them and have looked up, I have seen a shooting star. And I was afraid for the first couple of months to look at the sky because I was like, I can't look and not see it.
Yeah.
And one night I just felt my father so strong in me, and I have a newborn, and I also have my parents, all of their belongings in my shed, in the car, my dad's car in the driveway. And so I'm surrounded by this.
Yeah.
And I just felt my dad so much. And I walked out and I saw his car as I was walking out. And I just remember thinking, Papa, and I looked up and a flash of light.
Wow. Isn't that something? Very auspicious.
Right.
Really.
Speaking of auspicious, I'm so happy to be here on my birthday.
Yeah, that's right. It is your birthday. When you said that, I thought that's the first time that's happened.
I actually...
and thank you for taking the time, honestly, on your birthday to come do this.
Well, I have a history of really wonderful things happening on my birthday, and you are now part of that history.
That is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how old are you, may I ask?
I'm 44.
I'm 44 as well.
Yeah. 75.
Oh, wow, man.
Well, the first,
Awesome.
I always know something good is going to happen on my birthday. So when you said next week, I was like, let's do that on my birthday because I know that's going to be good. I remember when I was very young, my father, we had not money, but lots of riches. But my father said to me, for your birthday this year, he said, I've decided to invite the entire town. I'm going to throw a party, but I've decided I'm going to actually invite the entire town. And I said, okay. I knew that wasn't going to happen. He said, in fact, I asked everybody to kind of come out and park their trucks, maybe bring their, grills, or barbecue pits. And he said, then I was like, we need some music. So I got some bands to decide they were going to march down the road. And then I was like, let's just get some trucks and throw presents to her. And then he was like, and then I was like, well, let's throw presents to everyone, And so I thought, yeah, whatever. And we started driving in. Well, I didn't know it was Mardi Gras Day. I'd never been to Mardi Gras Day before. So I walked out as a 5-year-old on Mardi Gras Day, which was my birthday. You really thought, you painted that.
And
that's
so
smart. I was just waving like an idiot at everybody like, hey. And of course, everyone's drunk and reveling and so they're waving back too. And I'm like, I really thought that.
That is so.
And so my dad was the coolest in the entire
awesome.
world.
That is a wonderful
That
story.
was cool. And then I think, what was the next one? It was that, and then the Saints won the Super Bowl on my birthday.
Oh, really? That was this time of year.
I'm personally responsible for the Saints Nation. Can thank me.
You were born under a good sign.
Happen. Yeah. The next day I went and I had to interview for the PhD program, and was thinking no one's going to be there, because of the Super Bowl, but they were. So that was an amazing birthday. And then 6 years ago today, I had my firstborn child, my birthday present, Isabella.
That's something.
She's she and I. It's our birthday together.
So she actually that's incredible.
Isn't that fun?
It really is.
And now I'm here on my birthday.
Well, I
so
hope this is good. I hope this has been good
it's
for your
wonderful.
birthday.
Yeah, it's been wonderful.
I don't, you know, I would almost, I used to say I don't get to have conversations like this all the time. And I think that's, again, part of why this was born.
Yeah.
And now I'm just in love with it.
Right. I'm in love with the concept. I absolutely love it.
I love the people I've met. I've loved everything we've talked about. I could honestly just go on and run on.
Yeah.
You know?
I was thinking about all the good people that I've met. And once I found out that this was what you were doing, I was like, oh man, this is just the perfect thing. Talk about positivity, and then find out from people, you know, who in the world is out there. And I just think about, you know, people with the city, people with the university, people. When I moved here, I hadn't intended on moving here, and I was worried, and then my worries went away, and I found there's an army here of wildly talented people, passionate people, educated people, diverse people who are making changes within the city, you know, the schools. It's absolutely huge, and I think you should have an annual Find the Good News party retreat.
It's so funny. Are you psychic? Because we are going to do that.
Are you serious?
Yes. Me and my wife have been talking about that. Like, every year we want to have some kind of event where we bring, you know, everybody, and they can bring somebody with them.
It should be a family reunion.
Yeah, we've been talking about that.
Potluck, and if you need any help with managing that event,
that's great.
God,
that's so funny. We were literally just talking about this, like, over the holidays, especially. We're like, you know, that would be good because a lot of these folks don't
know each other.
They don't really know each other face to face, or they know of each other, but they don't have any interactions. The other thing we're going to start doing, we're calling them mixtapes. We're going to start every 25 episodes. We're going to do like a poll online, and then start asking people to mix and match who they'd like to see in a conversation.
Oh, how fun!
And so I'll be in the conversation, but then it will be 3 other people too.
Fun, yeah.
So we'll have some episodes with some past guests who maybe wouldn't normally interact.
Sit down at a table.
Yeah, and then speaking of that, the fishbowl. I don't know if you've listened to the show or not. But the fishbowl, we're going to use we're going to pass it around the table to kind of stimulate that during that. But now it's your turn to dig in there.
I get to dig in.
3 questions. Now, I'll tell you a little something new. I added something that I didn't write or any of the guests, but it's called the Wordsmith deck.
Okay.
And it's pretty cool. It's got a bunch of writing prompts, but as I started reading through them, I was like, these are good questions. So there's some of those in there.
Okay.
There's some that guests have put in. There's some I've put in.
Okay.
And let's see what you get.
All right. This is fun. All right. Where have you been getting distracted in life? That's what this whole birth life thing has been teaching me, is distraction.
Really?
I think that sometimes when you are, I'm trying to think about how delicately I can put this. When you find yourself tethered to another human being through marriage, and it was not the most beneficial thing to your soul, and you share a child together.
Yes.
You are in constant contact with a person who is challenges you, challenges your spiritual nature. And I think that, sometimes people give a lot of power to people. I don't really know how to speak more on that.
No, it's hard to talk about things like that without pause for the siren. We have a lot of sirens on the street.
It's telling me, stop talking.
Yeah, that's funny, because honestly, I relate.
Yeah.
I've been divorced, and I have 2 of my children from my previous marriage, and look, there's a reason why you're not married sometimes.
Sure. And what a blessing for the child that came from that, the children that came from that.
I have lovely children, and I love them very much.
At the same time, there's a great deal of damage that can come from those interactions. And so it can be easy. It's easy to get distracted by some of that. But you know what? Death has really helped me with that one. Death and birth has helped me with that one, because, you don't want to be entered into the fray or into the fights. Like,
you said that earlier about getting drawn into petty things. Death and birth will make those things sort of,
it really does.
Really, you go, I'm not doing this.
It really does.
Yeah.
So
I understand that one too. I've dealt with the same thing, and I've had similar feelings and struggles.
Yeah. Let's see. What creature do you most admire for its ability to adapt? We just talked about those. The butterfly.
Yeah.
The butterfly and the human.
Yeah. I mean, humans are pretty adaptable.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to forget how adaptable we are.
Good Lord.
I mean,
go through atrocities, holocausts,
yeah,
abusive relationships, imprisonment in your mind, of your body. One
of the things you said earlier, and on that subject, it made me think of it, is that sometimes we can pat ourselves on the back for being good at getting through things.
Right.
What
a crappy skill to congratulate ourselves on.
I honestly used to be that person.
I can get kicked in the face 50 times and
I was that person for a lot of years. I was so proud of myself for being able to get through bad stuff.
I know.
And I was like, man, this is terrible. I don't want this award.
Why am I championing my resilience? I should be championing something
good for
else.
me. I can get through these bad things without breaking down. And then, and it made me, and I don't know if I stayed in that place too long, but it kind of made me look at other people who weren't that way as, I mean, honestly, like a weaker person.
Right.
I would go, why are they breaking down? I'm not
strong.
breaking down.
Yeah,
and I'm so done with that, being that person and that feeling, because I was eventually, again, that realization of, what kind of award is this?
Right. It's not.
This is nothing.
And it's almost, and being happy about that skill with yourself, it's almost a violence towards those who don't have that ability. Because I look around and I love Tennessee Williams. I was a Tennessee Williams scholar for a while and worked with the festival in New Orleans. But his, one of his plays, he talks about, or poems too, about being a plight for the understanding of the misfit, a plight for the understanding of the ostracized, for the mad, and that's where it all comes down to. As soon as you look at somebody and they're the people who are uncomfortably straightforward with their emotions in life, and you see them and you're like, oh my God, ratchet it back. Like, you shouldn't be, please don't cry in aisle 7 of Kroger, like, please, but, or, you see them and they're the people that people shrink away from or shy away from. And there again, it's like, of course, the strong and the like-minded, they're comfortable for us to be around. But those people obviously are the ones that need help. And it's often the bullies that need help. It's often the ones that, if you're in a relationship with somebody who is unkind, it's probably that person who has been stepped on or beaten or bruised or dragged through the mud, or the people who are certifiably insane. I think
it's a reaction to damage.
Those with dementia, like, we shy away from these things because they're not comfortable for us. But man, we could walk towards it and embrace it if we could.
Yeah, I have a little story in my life, and it's just a small one, but it was not too many years ago. I was at Walmart during the middle of the day getting some stuff for the office, and there was this man walking around asking people if he could use their cell phone. And, there's all these stories about people asking for your phone and they run off with your phone, but he was really, like, visibly upset, and people would I watched for a while. I was guilty too, and people would sort of go and turn their head and walk away. And anyway, I saw him kind of walk off on an aisle, and he was like kind of cussing under his breath and frustrated, and he looked like something else was wrong, like something else was bothering him. And he came up to me and he said, can I use your cell phone? I've lost my phone in the store and I can't find it. And he started telling me all this stuff about his daughter. He moved to town. It was a big long story. Anyway, I said, you can use my phone. I said, I'll just stand right here with you while you use it, if that's all right with you. And he's like, yeah. And he said, thank you so much. And he calls his daughter to tell him he's lost the phone. He's not going to be able to get a hold of her to meet him wherever they were. And he hung up the phone, and all this pressure left him. He said, I've been walking around here. I'm not from here. He said, I've been walking here for 30 minutes. He said, and I just yesterday got through telling somebody why I moved to Southwest Louisiana was because the people were
so
nice.
Yeah.
And he said, and I've been in the store trying to get somebody to let me use their phone because I've lost my phone, and I just need to hear it ring.
Yeah.
And he said, and everyone just turns their head like I'm a criminal.
Right.
And he was like, and he said, I'm sorry. It was just very frustrating.
Yeah.
He said, you're the only person. I said, well, it's okay. It's okay. But that cracked open a big conversation. And I got to hear this guy's sort of short version of his life story, which was not so great. Mm-hmm. And what had brought him here and these situations in his life. And he was crying. In that moment, that guy was hurting so bad. And you could tell he'd just been through a lot of stuff. I said, do you pray? And he said, not really, I don't. I said, do you want to pray right now? And he was like, I guess, yeah. And so we just stood there in Walmart, put my hands on his shoulder, and I just prayed with the guy. I didn't ask him what he believed. And I came back here. He didn't find his phone. That was beside the point. But you could see like a calmness. And I've thought about it a lot. Like, what was it that just calmed him down and got his emotions back in check and gave him a little sense of like, you know? And I think it was just the fact, on so many dimensions, he realized that human beings care about human beings.
Right.
He got to see it for just a second. And then praying, he just for a moment was able to touch like a space that is not like in that cycle that we talked about, you know. And I come back and tell my wife, I said, this is such a strange experience. I said, I want more of that in my life, is what I realized.
Yeah.
I want to be more like that guy.
Yeah.
Not him, but in that moment, I want to be more myself.
That interaction,
right?
Yeah. I thought it's not at all the same kind of story, but I remember when I was working with the Tennessee Williams Norton's Literary Festival, there were many homeless people that were between my office and the Rouses that I would go to. And I remember walking in, and when I first started working there, I gave away so much money. Just like, just one thing after another. And my boss was like, oh God, you can't sustain this. But anyway, I was in there one day, and there was a gentleman, he was in a wheelchair. He was very dirty, and he didn't smell very good. And he was sitting there, and people you could see would just walk around him, like, you know, parting the seas, like, and he looked up at me. I have never seen more beautiful blue eyes in my entire life. His eyes were like blue crystal. They were stunning. And I was walking, and I stopped. I mean, it made me turn my head, and I turned around. I looked at him, and I said, good Lord. I said, you have the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen in my life. And he looked up at me, shocked that I had spoken to him. And just, you know, you could see him well up. And he was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I remember thinking, there's no way that anyone who looked at him could not see that. There's no way that you could not see that beauty. And we don't tell. We don't speak. I had an experience just yesterday in the office with Jody Taylor. We had something that had gone on, and there was a problem that needed to be solved, and I had responded to it, and he came in, he sat down in my chair, and he said, I want to tell you something. And I was like, this is just, you know, we all in the office, we communicate very well together, and but I could tell it was a little different. And he looked at me, and he made eye contact. He was like, I want to thank you for standing, you know, going to bat on this issue. He's like, I want to thank you. And I was like, and he just, like, it was just a moment. It was just a breath of time. And I could tell that was, it was a very important moment. It couldn't have lasted more than like 1/1002, you know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was like, he said, I wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And I just remember in that moment thinking, you know, that's so noble and that's so important. And, you know, when we're in working relationships or personal relationships or mother-child, father-child relationships, there are going to be things that are difficult. There will be difficult moments. Like in the office, we are going to aggravate each other at some point. We're going to make decisions that, you know, the other person doesn't agree in. When in our marriages, in our, you know, relationships and our friendships. But if we can acknowledge that and then remember to come back always and just be open and accessible, and especially to do the kind of thing that he did, which was sit down and say, you know, thank you for this. Yeah. Or to tell the homeless gentleman, your eyes are beautiful. Or my husband is like a champion at this, you know, like I'm making his lunch, and he grabs my shoulder and he looks at me and makes eye contact, and he said, I love when you make me lunch. Don't ever think that I don't appreciate this act, you know, when you're like, this is just a rote act that, you know, someone could not care about. It's just, you know, people have stopped me in my tracks so many times, and I want to be that person.
I do too.
I want to be that person every day. My child, Isabella, the one whose birthday is today, she and I made a tradition when she was about 3 years old, where we would go do something nice for somebody and like sneak away, or, you know, like not right. Not get, you know, caught doing something nice, or not ask for something, you know, in return. And I remember telling her, okay, let's do this all the time. She said, okay. I said, we should have a name for this tradition. And she was 3. She was like, Duck Pond. I said, perfect. That's perfect. I don't know why it's perfect, but it was perfect. It makes no sense, but all the sense in the world. And, you know, we would have that tradition. And I think about just in the tradition of the day is that can I stop 3 times and tell something to someone good within my own personal sphere, you know?
Yeah.
my spouse, my child, or the cashier at the grocery store. I remember after Katrina hit, everybody made eye contact a lot more. People asked each other, "How are you?" And they actually responded, and they actually meant it when they asked the question. And then I saw how that kind of went away.
It's shared pain. Everybody's in the same situation. Yeah, it's different whenever everybody's suffering.
And it's terrible to say, but wars, natural disasters, personal loss, death, all of these things, relationships that are horrific that we go through, all of these things, they either are the excrement or they are the fertilizer. And we choose.
It's one of my favorite stories. Really, I don't know if it's a story. I don't know what you call it. Maybe a sermon, but it's the mustard seed that the Buddha told the woman to go get a mustard seed from a home. Did you know that story?
I'm actually, as you're saying it, I'm nodding like I know, but I'm thinking of Christ to the mustard seed.
Well, it's interesting. They both had something about mustard seed, but a woman who had lost her child comes to the Buddha and is like, I'm suffering. I miss my child. I need master, good Lord, help me. What do I do? And he's like, go to the home, go find the home, go to a home where no one has died and get me a mustard seed. And so she's like, I'm going right now. So goes amongst the village and the towns, and she knocks on the first door, and she's like, the good Lord has told me to bring a mustard seed. And they're like, oh, we have a mustard seed. Said, but no one can have died in this home. They're like, oh no, my husband just died last week. And she's like, okay. So she goes house to house, same story.
She couldn't find
She goes back to the Lord's feet and says, oh Lord, you've healed me. Because it was a lesson to her, and he knew what he was doing. I just love it because it's that shared. When we see other people that way, when we see that they all hurt, they all suffer. They all have pains and sorrows, and it makes it just so much different.
It does. I worked at a high school actually in town. I'd never worked in a high school before, and God bless the people that work in high schools and middle schools, because they should be paid more than NFL football players for sure. They should be wildly compensated. But I worked in the school, the particular class I was dealing with, the whole school really, at the time, and it's gotten much better, was really kind of rough. The kids were, they were underserved. They came from a rough background, and so there wasn't value in education, there was value in survival. And so survival meant that you had, gangs, friends, people that you looked cool in front of, and so teaching this group was very difficult. And I had them in a theater class, and I was struggling with this class. They would throw things, they wouldn't listen. It was just and I tried every avenue to get to them. And one day finally I said, we're going to do an exercise. I said, the difference between dialogue and a monologue, if you watch a movie or a play, when people talk back and forth, that's dialogue. I said, when one person is talking like I'm doing right now, that's monologue. I said, so we're going to talk about monologues today. I want you to write a monologue. They're all like,
Right.
And I said, no. I said, wait with me just for a second. I said, just close your eyes for 1 second, and I want you to think what, and anyone who's listening, I would invite them to do the same thing too. What has brought you to your knees? Something has brought you to your knees. What was it? What did it sound like? What did it feel like inside of your body? Fear is not just an ethereal thing. It actually can roil your stomach. Grief can cause physical response to it. What was it that got you there? What did it smell like? What did it sound like? What was the one instance where something came and it felt so big that you were never going to survive it? You could never get up, that you just had rage or anger or pain or fear or agony, and you couldn't stand ever again. I'm like, I want you to think about that. So they actually did. And then I said, okay, now forget that, erase that board, in your mind. I said, think about something else. Like, what is a moment when you can remember being around your friends, surrounded with just hilarity, like where you could just laugh so hard milk is coming out of your nose, like something that just like you can barely breathe. You're laughing so much that you just feel just like celebratory or fun, or you're going down the street, on Mardi Gras Day, and you just what is it that happened that was so funny, and a story that you might have told multiple times because it's so hilarious. And then I said, okay, erase that. And I stood in front of that high school class, and I said, it is not appropriate for me to to speak to your spirituality, because that's a very private thing, and what I believe doesn't need to be what you believe. So without using any of the language that makes that a prickly kind of situation or a conversation, have you ever felt, I said, close your eyes, have you ever felt grace wash over you? Have you ever felt the majesty of something that is so much bigger than you? The joy or the peace or the unexplainable beauty. Have you walked into a church, or have you had an experience where you just knew that you are part of a flow of something that was so big, and the good and the bad, it was all okay because it had meaning even if you couldn't understand it? And so after I did that, I had them, I said, okay, now erase that. I was like, pick one of those things that you just found in your head, like either the thing where you're on the floor, or the thing where milk's coming out your nose, or the thing where, you feel some sort of grace or divinity or something. And I said, just write, 60 seconds is about this long, blah, blah, blah. They wrote me their stories. I took them home. That class of 25 children in Lake Charles, in an underserved area, the stories that they told me, I get chills every single time I think about those stories. Because we talk about poverty, and we talk about loss, and we talk about, children not having the guidance. Like, you talk about your son in ways where you're molding, you're leading him to make spiritual choices, or mental choices, or intellectual choices, or artistic choices, not being, overbearing on him, but opening up for the river to flow where it goes. These kids, so far, the opposite experience of existence. It's just not even, it's not in the same universe, and many of them, I read those stories, and the next day I came and I looked at those kids and I was like, your stories are amazing. You are carrying inside of you worlds that no one next to you even knows. And maybe your best friend knows some of these stories, but, you are brave, you are strong, you are amazingly resilient. Grammar, we could work on that a little bit, but a lot. But, your stories need to be told, and that's what people are doing in songs and theater, and check this stuff out and use this as an outlet, And I told him, I said, if you want to come up and perform your monologue, you can do it. If you don't want to, but you want someone else to read it, you can do that and be anonymous. If you want me to do your monologue, perform your monologue, I'll do it. And one little girl came up, and I knew who she was, and I knew her backstory. And that child was in the principal's office more often than she probably ate food. I don't know. She was in there all the time. And she pushed it across the table at me, and I said, "Are you going to read this?" And she said, "No." She said, "I want you to." And I said, okay, I could not reach this child for anything, but here she is allowing me to speak her story, Yeah. And the monologue was basically something to the effect of, you might want to make fun of me because I'm a freshman and I've already had 3 boyfriends, but you have no concept of what it is like to have your mother pick some crack dealer over you, and for you not to know where you're going to sleep at night, for you to have to go find food at night or go through somebody's trash to get something to eat. So the next time you want to make fun of me because I have a boyfriend, you don't know what it is to need security.
Yeah.
And then this other child, got up and he gave me his monologue, and I had read his, and I thought, well, for sure this one's not going to read his. And I said, "Do you want me to read it?" And he said, "No, I will." I said, "Okay." And he got up there and he told the story. He was like, I remember when the door got kicked open, and a man came in. It was my mom's boyfriend, and he was mad because my little brother left a toy in the driveway, and he picked up this paddle and he started just wailing on him, just beating him, and they thrust it into my hand, and he said, "You hit him." And he said, "I didn't want to hit him, I love him," and everything. And he said he forced me, and I hit him so light, but he got mad because I didn't hit him hard enough, and next thing I know, his foot is on my neck and my face is in the carpet, and my mom's laughing at me, And those children got up and performed those monologues, and that same class, fast forward a month or so later, I had the good fortune of directing The Crucible for McNeese State University, and I had those children read The Crucible. Now, who would have thought that these kids would read The Crucible, which is not the most, scintillating reading for a teenager, but they actually were reading it, and I'm talking to them. I'm like, okay, this happened historically. This is during the Salem witch trials. You had two choices. If somebody didn't like you because you stole their chicken, they thought, or your land, they thought was theirs, or you dated their ex-boyfriend or whatever, someone could say you're a witch. You have two choices in that moment. Either you say, yes, I am a witch, and they will let you go free and you'll be, damned by society. Or you can say, I am not a witch. And then they will put you in water until you drown. And if you drown, that meant you were pure. But if you float up, then you are a witch. You're either going to get hung from a tree, or you can lie. And I'm sitting in that classroom of kids who would throw markers across the room, and I'm literally overhearing the conversation of one of them talking to two others. And the guy was like, dude, what would you do? Like, what would you do in that situation? The other kid was like, he was like, you either say you're a witch, or and then you're free, or you don't and you die. And the one guy was like, dude, I'm a witch all day long. Like, I'm a witch. I don't want to die. Like, I would lie and say I'm a witch, And the other guy's like, no, I'm not doing that. He's like, because who I am matters more than that. And if they, if I got to die that way, then I'm going to go down and die that way. I'm going to stand up for myself because I'm not that thing.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to these kids who could care less about, education, having these amazing conversations. And then fast forward again down the road when we went into production, I brought in the lead actor, who was Randy from Lake Charles Little Theater, Randy Parton, and this gorgeous actress who played Abigail, and I had them do scenes. Well, my kids walked over, shook their hands, made eye contact, listened, leaned forward in their chairs, and then asked if they could do a scene with them. And those kids got up and performed. Then they came out to see the play, and they were, hollering in the seats. And all of that happened with a group of kids that a lot of, I think, other people would have written off as being too difficult in terms of their behavior. They would have just written them off.
Well, it's interesting, too, that particularly the Crucible, what you described, those children, the decisions they're having to make are not easy, right? And so that book, or that play particularly for them, is kind of cutting to the heart of the matter. Difficult choices, and neither one of them are really good, but you still have to make them, navigating these very, very unreasonable circumstances. Right. And how many times do we all have to do that?
Right.
And these little kids having to do it every day. That's incredible.
It is. But that, you could take kids and you could put them into a room with a psychiatrist and be like, okay, help them. Right. But not everybody can have that experience, nor is everybody aligned with someone that can speak to them in that way. But if you can continue to put literature in front of them, plays in front of them, poetry in front of them, things that can remind them of something beautiful, there's the quote, always keep something beautiful in your mind. There's war-torn areas of this world right now that are being ravaged right this second, and if you keep something beautiful in your mind, you can get through and continue on. And again, it makes you more tolerant of people around you when you start to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Well, the value of just reading. As I'm listening to this whole conversation, I just keep thinking of, I feel blessed to have taken to reading and liking it and wanting more when I was young, because now I still do. And I mean, you can really fill your head with a lot of information that you may not be able to retain necessarily, but it imprints upon you something, It opened a lot of doors for me, and it just created an interest in a lot of things that I'm so glad I was able to visit in detail, you know, some of these philosophies or places, or just get inside someone's mind.
Right.
Yeah.
And books are going away, just like newspapers are going away. I hope my children want to read. I really desperately do. My parents instilled that in me, and poetry and the love for that.
Sure. You don't want to get stuck in a world of just reading headlines and short opinions and stuff, which I do read articles on the internet and stuff. And I think there's value in that. It's nice to be able to look things up that you're interested in and find an avenue. But I typically, my path usually leads me to a book. If it's something I'm really interested in, I'm going to go find a book or get a recommendation for a book, because that's where I'm going to sink in, you know.
And I think that some people shy away from that because of the investment that it requires to sit down and actually read a book, which is why I think some writers like oh gosh, am I blanking on his name? David Sedaris. While his subject matter might be a little raw for some people, he writes in chunks. He writes about, in vignettes. His chapters are pieces of his life that don't follow any kind of chronologic order, and I think that's helpful for people sometimes who can't get into the linear kind of approach of a book. But sometimes it could be just a couple of sentences or a couple of syllables, even one that will never leave me, and it leads me in my whole life. It's followed me forever. Is one little piece of a Pablo Neruda poem. I want to do with you what spring does to the cherry trees.
So interesting. I wrote that down because I saw it on your Facebook page.
Did you?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's just like, man, light it up. Just light it up.
Yeah.
Light it up. Time is short.
So that's interesting how a piece of something will stick with you.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. You have one more question. Look at what they do. Isn't that lovely, though?
I love
this part of the show because that one question generates, it's like the engine for so much.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful?
No, my husband, we started out a relationship like this.
Really?
We would talk until 3:00 in the morning with questions. Like, we would pull him off. There's one that's online, and I can't remember the person that put it together, but basically the gist of it was, you cannot go through this series of questions and speak honestly with another human being and get to the end and not have fallen in love with that person.
Oh, wow.
And so, but I've done that series of questions with so many different people. I think you can fall in love with a person doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a romantic thing.
Right.
I think we should fall in love with people every day, and that our lives would be beautiful if we did. But yeah, we started out this way.
I like that.
Always do questions. If you had to write a book, what would you write about?
That's a good question for this conversation.
Yeah.
Well, you said you were going to write a play.
My books would be plays. And some of them are half created. But I guess all of them. There's one play called Vicetown that's anyway, it's a play, and it has a predominantly women cast. I think that women live in a particularly hard time where they feel that they depreciate as they age. And I have 2 daughters who are stunningly beautiful inside and out. One I'm just getting to know. The other one I know, but I see how women, because of what's on TV and who's popular and famous, they think that their worth lies in the outside, their physical attraction, or how they feel about themselves physically. And I think that women, it's John O'Donohue said, there is no way into the universe except through the body of a woman.
Wow. Yeah, something to really think about.
And if you think about that, how can you not be a tribe that loves and supports each other? How could you possibly not hold each other up and raise each other up and have reverence? How could you not have reverence for yourself, dignity in yourself and your body and your choices? How could you not reach out? And I think that our society has been patriarchal for, ever. And I think that, we've got our first fighter pilot died just recently, How in the world are we in 2018 and our first woman fighter pilot just died?
Yeah.
How is it possible? And I think that I just want people to have reverence for themselves, and not just women, but I think that that's where the dearth is a lot of times, just to have passion and love and respect. And so the book really would be just about live, breathe, dance, climb a tree, go play in the rain, get muddy, sit out underneath the stars. It's all so fleeting. We can't spend our time on the things that deplete us, and I have been guilty of that, and we all are to a certain extent. But man, I want my children I look at my newborn, my 5-month-old, and I look at her all the time, and I'm like, enjoy your life.
Yeah.
Enjoy your life.
Yeah.
You know, don't worry constantly. Worry gets you nothing. You know, don't fret about the past, and don't worry about the future. You can't do anything about those. It's be in this moment right now. And when I loop in my head about something that I would tell like an ex-husband or something, or if I loop in my head about something that happened on the street, I got cut over, then I'm not in this moment right here.
Yeah.
And if you're in that moment right there, that's navigable with grace usually.
Yeah.
It's when you're constantly pulled in those other directions that you live a very depleted life. And I have seen people get to the end of their lives who have worried so much their entire life, or have killed themselves with their jobs and lived in fear. And I look at that and I'm just like, I want them to explode like the cherry blossoms.
Yeah, I love that. It's true, though. I mean, I would want the same thing for my children. I want it for me. I want it for my wife. I want it for everybody. You know, feel the ground underneath your feet. Take your shoes off. You know, feel cold on your skin.
Right.
You know, just feel the world.
Yeah.
You know, feel what's out there. I mean, a paper cut, a kiss. You know, hear a song, let it actually sink into you and not just be like something that's just fleeting, you know.
Everything goes,
and just bounces off of you.
Savor.
Yeah, savor, right. I mean,
celebrate.
That's it. There are places in the world, I guess, that some of us, they're inside of us as well, but like real places that you can go if you make them. It's kind of like what I was saying about the rose oil. It's like you can make those places, sure. You know, like out of anything and anywhere. You know, sometimes it's just a tree. I mean, like, you know, our tree at home has become something that we all quite love. I mean, we have different bird feeders and bells and flags hanging in the tree, and what's interesting is, and there's iron things that we hang lanterns on it, and I like going out to that tree, and I hung some new bells yesterday. And as I was hanging the new bells, I noticed that the chain from some bells I hung earlier, they're in the tree now. And I love it. It's just, you know, it's grown, it's an inch thicker. Yeah. But there's just something about it. And I put my hand on it, and I thought, you know, how many more times will I get to do this? How many more bells will I get to hang in the tree? You know, will I live long enough to see this chain that I'm putting in here now grown into the tree? And, you know, will I have the same thought when I do it again the next time? Will I get to do it again? Those thoughts like that, I've been told by other people going, that's kind of dark. And I'm like, doesn't feel dark to me. It brings me into that observer mode of my own life, and I don't feel old or young at that moment. I feel like it's omnidirectional. Yeah. You know, a little bit.
Always to remind, but those spaces I think are very important. And again, it doesn't matter what your background is, but like for me, the Adoration Chapel, 24-hour Adoration Chapel, my Lord, that thing is open 24 hours. Yeah. How often is it at 4:00 in the morning when you get the news, you know, about something that happens, and there's nowhere to go,
and there's a space to go.
And there's a space.
We have that in common, you and I. That is something I've ran to privately for a long time, because you're right. That is a blessing. There's always there. It's always open, and you can always go be in that space.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah,
it's huge.
And I love you just